Okay, should be live. Please let me know in the chat if you can see me. Let me know if you can hear me. Let me know how the sound is. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. I don't really know what other holidays there are other than Christmas and Hanukkah, so I take back my happy holidays, I guess. I mean, I guess I don't really take it back, but people are going to get mad about it. But Merry Christmas. I know it was yesterday. And the first day of Hanukkah was also yesterday. It's always interesting when they fall on the same day. So if you celebrated Christmas, and even if you didn't, Merry Christmas. And if you celebrated Hanukkah, and even if you didn't, Happy Hanukkah. Let me know in the chat, though, how the sound is and whether or not, the picture is good. Please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm and boost this content. So if you find it valuable, I would really appreciate it. And if you want to see more of this, and you are not subscribed, please subscribe. But I don't know what kind of turnout we're going to have tonight because it's a weird week. Like I said, it was Christmas yesterday and it was the first night of Hanukkah. So a lot of people are spending time with family as they should. So if you are, do not leave your family for the sake of this stream. You can always watch it later. But if you care to join us, you are welcome. So tonight I want to kind of just have a pretty informal stream. Hence the ugly sweater. That's not ugly. My wife got it for me, so it's not ugly. Happy holidays, says my wife in the chat. But yeah, it's very cozy, and I like it. It's not ugly, but you could describe it as an ugly sweater. Holiday sweater. I don't know why. I don't know why people call them ugly. I mean, some of them are ugly, but I mean, this one's not. But like I said, please hit the like button to boost this type of content. And today we're going to have a pretty open stream. If you have any questions, ask me in the chat. We're not going to really be doing that much of a commentary. There is one clip that I want to show and talk about a little bit of Brian Greene that's kind of funny. But we are going to discuss evolution and certain concepts and symbols in religion and narratives within theology and how they relate to science going forward and how they've related to science in the past and how they have related and how they relate to sentient singularity theory, because there's a lot there. I'm going to probably dive into some details of sentient singularity theory and the models of sentient singularity theory that are kind of more just in the weeds and might seem kind of odd if you are not somebody who has followed this process for an extended, period of time and don't know a lot about this project. But if you would like to learn more, sentientsingularity.com. And you can see my website. So there's also a link to a video that I made called Theories of Everyone, the How-To Guide, that is linked below as well. You can check that out. But so in the past, theology and science, quote unquote, which is really the academic, let's define some terms. Because if we look up the term science, let's look this up. And just for the record, I will not be arguing for or against any. I guess I will argue. I will be arguing that there are multiple theological traditions that are super literally true, which means they have historical truth, they have predictive truth, they have metaphorical truth, or at least their scriptures do. I will say, I don't even want to say religion. I hate that term, but I tend to call them theological traditions. Judaism is a theological tradition. Islam is a theological tradition. Mormonism is a theological tradition. Christianity is a theological tradition. You could say Buddhism and Hinduism and definitely Sikhism and Hinduism. I think you could say Buddhism as well. In the West, we don't think of it as religion, but I think that in parts of the world that it is much more so. But and these, when I say theological tradition from now on, I mean what most people call religion. But most of these traditions do not have the same intention and the same purpose behind them. They have shared purposes, but they don't have the same purpose. And that is something to remember when making some attempt to compare them. And I would definitely say that I believe that every theological tradition that I just named is true. I would describe it as true. And their scriptures I would describe as super literally true. And not, people will say, well, it's metaphorical. When I first started getting into scripture a little bit, I was like, oh, it's metaphor. Now I get it. It makes sense. It's a metaphor. And that was a step in the right direction. I just thought it was a fairy tale before that, which really means like fake. It's a stand-in for just a description of fake or a categorization. And I don't believe that at all anymore. But I did grow up a self-described atheist, but truly an anti-theist. I disbelieved in a supreme sentient being as the creator of the cosmos, and initiator and sustainer and of the cosmos. And it was my journey of trying to understand the mind and what is the structure of mind and how it thinks and how we feel, and that journey, and then also just my obsession with, you could say, the hard sciences my whole life. Not really physics so much, but I mean, to some degree physics, but I didn't understand what I was listening to. I was just listening to Michio Kaku and stuff. But I mean, I did, understand quite a bit about ecology, biology, zoology. I'm very into just wildlife, and what we would describe as life, but really plants and animals. And so I have a background in that. I've worked with some of the top biologists slash zoologists slash herpetologists, which is somebody who's a biologist slash zoologist who is specializing in reptiles and amphibians. I've worked with them on field studies, and I've worked with animals in captivity. And so I have quite a background and firsthand understanding of beings that evolve and that we talk about as evolving. And we're going to talk about what I think, how that term should be understood in this stream tonight. But when we look at the term science definition, it's the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained. That is how it is described when you type it into Google. Science is the pursuit and application of knowledge and understanding of the natural and social world. I guess now it's social world, following a systematic methodology based on evidence. Scientific methodology includes the following: objective observation, measurement and data, possibly through necessarily using mathematics as a tool, evidence, and experimentation, essentially. So in English, science came from Old French, meaning knowledge, learning, application, and a corpus of human knowledge. It originally came from the Latin word scientia, which meant knowledge, a knowing, expertness, or expertise, or experience. Okay, expertness or experience. By the late 14th century, science meant in English collective knowledge. So if you ask people, though, they'll say it's either science is a method, or they will just use it as a substitute for like the pursuit of truth, a term to describe the pursuit of truth using logic and math and experimentation and observation. And this really means that science has, as a term, has become a term for a narrative, essentially. And because it can't just be a substitute for the term truth. That is bad. Because it is a method, and to some degree. And so it's interesting. I was listening to one of the latest episodes of Kurt Mungel's Theories of Everything channel, and it was with Matthew something I forgot, who's a philosophy professor, and it was about process philosophy. I had not ever heard of this before, really. I mean, I think maybe I'd heard the term, but I've never heard anybody discuss it in any detail. And it is an incredible stream. I highly recommend it to anybody who, has any interest in this type of stuff. Definitely watch the entire thing. It's probably my favorite episode of Theories of Everything with Kurt yet. And it's going to be probably the stream that we do our first commentary of the new year on in 2025. So maybe next week. It is an incredible stream. But he talks about this stuff, and in it they talk about, well, how I think it's in this stream. He says, I think Kurt asks, how is this a process if it's also a structure or something like that? He doesn't say structure, I don't think, but he says, how is it a process and also a something? And in my paper that I've been writing on sentient singularity theory, I describe being, or sentient singularities, or sentient beings, or mind, as a structure / process. And this is kind of the way that I think we have to start thinking about a lot of new or I guess not necessarily new concepts, but maybe like the oldest concepts that or the most foundational concepts that exist. We have to start thinking of them as this superpositional structure, where they are both a structure and a process. They are a thing and a being to some degree. And this is I think something that you have to almost do when it comes to something like science, because science is thought of as this collective knowledge that humanity has, which is this narrative of knowledge that humanity has, and of things that we know collectively. You might not know the specifics of some of it. I might not know the specifics of some of it, but that guy might know some, and I might know some, and you might know some, and then together we all have this narrative that fits together, hopefully, ideally. And this, though, when we're discussing when the term science, and we use the term science, we're kind of assuming that humanity is basically like a mind that is able to have this uniformity to it, and this ability to be coherent and concise enough to make sense as one, as one entity to some degree, that human civilization can function as one entity and have this narrative of knowledge that we have, as one. And I'm not saying that that's true. I don't think that we actually can in this current state that humanity is in. I think eventually we will get there, but right now we can't. And I'll discuss exactly why, because it's highly relevant to what we're going to talk about. So what is the next step for humanity in its evolution? What is the future of us? This is a very important thing that I think we have to start thinking about much more than we are. But I think that that's happening also, with the more widespread adoption of AI and various new technologies. I think we are starting to think about humanity as in a different way, especially the internet. Really, with the adoption of the internet, we really changed how we view the future of humanity, and I think it is the cornerstone technology. I'm not saying that there aren't that many technologies necessary to our inevitable future. There are, but that one it's this central cornerstone piece of technology, and we'll discuss it more. But it is the thing that has begun already and will probably eventually, went through a process that I'll discuss tonight, unify human civilization. And it has started, but we're not there, and we can't get there just by I don't know, like talking to each other on X. I mean, I guess we will get there naturally. We can't get there necessarily because we try. I don't think, because the reality is that we all have different experiences, and we come from different backgrounds, and we have different goals, and that and we have different ignorances as well, and that means that we cannot fully understand where each other's coming from, and so we can't be on the same page about everything, and at least everything, even everything really centrally important, we cannot be on the same page. But before the internet, there was a narrative that you did unify humanity in large amounts throughout the world, and that many people call religion. And I know Richard Dawkins describes it as a virus or meme, probably both, I think. And I don't agree with that, even though I do understand. I mean, I guess I understand where he's coming from, but it's kind of paints it in a negative light. And people are imperfect, but things don't spread that are not true to beyond a certain point. It can spread, certainly, but it ends up hitting a dead end. It does not continue to persist and grow. Let me say that. Let me rephrase that. Things that are not true do not grow. They can spread, but they do not grow. That's a different thing. That which grows continues to grow in number across generations, and because in some way it's tied to the logos of our reality. That's a term that I probably should put in the title, but logos is a term that I think should really make a comeback, and it has started to over the past 5-6 years or so. I've seen it, and here, logos, word, discourse, or reason, is a term used in Western philosophy, psychology, and rhetoric, as well as religion, most notably Christianity. Among its connotations is that of a rational form of discourse that relies on inductive and deductive reasoning. Aristotle first systematized the usage of the word, making it one of the three principles of rhetoric alongside ethos and pathos. This original use identifies the word closely with the structure and content of language or text. Both Plato and Aristotle use the term logos along with rima to refer to sentences or propositions. Okay, so it's the coherent structure / content of language. But in religion, it's also thought of as, and philosophy is the generative structure of existence. It is the life of the cosmos itself. It's the life process, the growth process of the sentient cosmos. That's what the logos is. And in Christianity, the logos is Christ, and which is also described as the Word made flesh. And in Judaism, the Torah, which is the story of the creation of the world and of human civilization and its interaction with God, is described as the Word, which is it's kind of considered the code of creation in Jewish metaphysics as well. And when you move towards Christianity and even I think Islam, the Word made flesh is Christ, which is kind of like the capstone, the epitome of the endpoint of this creation evolutionary process of the cosmos. And so if notice that it's very logos is tied very much to generativity, which is growth. I forgot who logos, generative structure. Logos, generative philosophy. Who was it that said it's generative? The Stoics. Okay, the Stoics often referred to the seminal logos, the logos spermaticos, as the law of generation in the universe, which was the principle of active reasoning working in inanimate matter, which means it's not inanimate matter. It's working. It's the chain of sentience. It's the growing chain of sentience. That's what it is. It's not just, you can't have a principle of active reasoning within inanimate matter. Every bit of matter that is actively reasoning is sentient, and it's the perception of sentience. So humans too each possess that portion of the divine logos. The Stoics took all activity to imply a logos or spiritual principle. But there was a Jewish Stoic. There was a Jewish and Hellenistic philosopher. Where is it? Okay. Philo, an educated diaspora Jew from Alexandria, exponent of the philosophy known as Middle Platonism. Philo's philosophy of God. There's a transcendent deity God who is also the God of the Jewish revelation. And I believe he was the one that said logos is like the generative structure of existence, something like that. As God creative principle. Interesting. So, but mind has to have coherence. That's what what differentiates a mind from a computer is that a mind has one, a will, and two, internal coherence, in at least in its process. That's because that internal coherence is what allows for you to be self-aware. It's what allows for you to feel. To feel is to be self-aware. You cannot be self-aware without feeling, and it's not just critical to self-awareness, it is self-awareness. Mere calculation is not a lead to consciousness. It doesn't happen at all, actually. Its computation is defined by a goal always. So it has to it requires a sentient being to define it and make it be, I guess. But in the scientific quote unquote pursuits, which is really just academic studies, okay, of the natural world, theology was always part of it. And it was not just part of it, it was the cornerstone of it. It was the central pillar. It was the foundation of the natural sciences. And people say science didn't exist until this time. I mean, you can literally look it up. When was science created? When was science created? Invented? Science wasn't invented at a specific point in time, but rather developed gradually through human history, with its earliest roots traceable. Okay, so it had, like, people began to observe and attempt to explain natural phenomena. This is further supportive of the idea that science is a narrative now, because people have always been observing the natural world and then reporting on what they see and trying to understand through experimentation. How do you think we got domesticated animals and plants? By experimenting, guys. Like put this, like Mendelbrot sets, and the monk Mendel, who took his pea plants if you learned about that in school. And he, bred his pea plants together to make, different kinds of attributes in the pea plants that he was producing. People have done that with plants and animals for since the beginning of civilization. And I would say it's almost like it is almost the beginning of civilization. That and marriage is, and you learn that agriculture is the beginning of civilization in school. And I would say that that is probably the secondary. Um, it's not. I don't even want to say it's secondary, but it's the physical kind of structure of civilization, but not the social structure of civilization. The central social change in social structure from pre-civilization to civilization is marriage, is the adoption and expectation of marriage. And then the technological change really with civilization was I would say agriculture. That's fine. That makes sense. It is the centralization of now food sourcing and sourcing. Uh, and that is what its civilization is. It's kind of this group of people who have decided to form some type of collective. And from the time that that has happened, you could argue that science has existed even as a narrative. Um, and people try and differentiate it from theology. And I don't think that you really can, uh, because I think you lose your ability to make sense of the world on at scale, at least. Not on a micro scale, but on a macro scale, you do. And you lose the ability to make sense of your world. And because of that, you can't make sense of the world. That doesn't mean you can't make sense of finch bird beaks, you know, just by observing the fact that what they eat in different places causes their beaks to grow a different way, and that helps them eat more and of some specialized, food source. And that's an obvious thing that you can deduce on a microcosm. I know people give Darwin a lot of credit, but I'm like, I don't actually know how like revolution revelatory his observations were. I'm not saying trying to take anything away from him. I'm not against Darwin's work or anything like that, but it's like we were selectively breeding animals and plants already at that point for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. If that's the case, then we understood selective reproduction, or this, how selection impacts, the next generation. You might not call it evolution, but it's the same exact thing. And same thing with the term science. We might not have called it science, but if you were making observations about the natural world and trying to understand it, and doing something and being like, well, let's see what happens, that sounds basically like science. And but then this narrative of science nowadays has been, and it has become increasingly an anti-theological narrative, and it has doomed it, as long as it continues that being an anti-theological narrative. It's not an atheological narrative where God is absent from the discussion. God is not absent from the discussion of in sciences. Watch any panel of physicists in the world today talk on a live stream, and God will come up, and they will usually oppose the concept. But it will come up, which means it's part of the discussion, because you can't eliminate it. You can't eliminate that which is true. And that which is true grows. Religions, people who adopt religions or theological traditions, better term, if it's a true theological tradition, they grow, leads to them being fruitful and multiplying. The same is not said of every tradition. People who adopt Scientology do not seem to form families and produce lots of kids. it just doesn't have the same, it's not the same thing, whatever it is. I don't really know much about Scientology, but judge it by its fruits and you can tell it is different than the others. It doesn't spread, or it doesn't grow. It did spread. I mean, it certainly has spread at certain points in its history. Of course, it got very popular. And it's now it's kind of laughed at by the mainstream, but it wasn't always the case. People thought it was like the cool thing at some point, and it got popular so it spread, but it didn't grow. And that's which is true, grows and leads to growth. And that's true of our scientific narratives as well, is that if we adopt an idea about the cosmos, if it's true, it should lead to our growth. And I think in that stream with Kurt and that philosopher Matthew something, I forgot his last name, I think Matthew said, there is this concept in oh no, it wasn't him. Who was it? It was maybe it was him, but I don't. He said something similar, but and at least very relevant. And I think I also heard somebody else say this, maybe recently on a stream I did a commentary on, but they said, we should focus, we should pursue the truth no matter where it leads us, and if it leads us to, pointlessness and meaninglessness, then so be it. And I actually think that that's true, that you should follow the truth wherever it leads, but I think that it should be understood going into the pursuit of truth that it will not lead you to pointless meaninglessness and, decay. But the problem is that you need a narrative of sentience, of a sentient cosmos, of an intentional cosmos that is sentient, in order to have to go into that go down that road where we're going toward the truth no matter where it leads us, but it's gonna lead us somewhere good, and it's gonna lead us to growth. That's why you pursue the truth. Otherwise, why pursue the truth? It's like, if it's not gonna be helpful, if you don't think it must be helpful even, then why pursue it? Other than, I guess you could argue it could be helpful, but it might also be very harmful. I mean, look at technology. It appears, without, the narrative of a sentient intentional cosmos with some type of plan behind this, this whole, web of life, then it does appear like we're doomed. It does. And I realized this at some point when I was in my mid-20s, right before I became a theist. I realized part of why I was wondering if AGI, which would be able, what its relationship would be with humanity, was because, for one, I didn't want to live under tyranny, and I was hoping that it would liberate us from human tyranny, the grip of human tyrants. But I wanted to know whether or not it would, so I tried to deduce what its inevitable political goals would be. But I also realized that if, absent some type of black swan narrative shift, we were doomed. Humans. Not maybe 100% doomed. And I don't believe this anymore. I think it is 100% that we are not doomed. But I used to I believe that we were 100% doomed. And a lot of people in the academic world and scientific, quote unquote scientific narrative, we'll try and talk about things as in terms of odds and probability. They'll be like, maybe it's 10% that we make it past the great filter, and it's 90% that we don't. Maybe 90% of civilizations don't make it past, but 10% do. And this is actually not the right way to look at certain things beyond our control that are this is because you believe that there is no intentionality behind the cosmos. And so you start to talk about things in terms of odds, because it's just a bunch of things in a, there's just a bunch of marbles in a jar, and it's just, they're just bouncing around. But how are they bouncing around? I don't know. Like, somebody's got to shake the jar, I think. But if it's kind of assumed nobody's shaking the jar, but the marbles are shaking. But this is why people think about it in terms of probability. And probability is a tool. It is not actually a fundamental property of existence. Existence has two forces: causal determinism and will. And that's it. You could say that logical determinism and will. Those are the two causal forces. And they are not competing. They are codependent. They are dependent, I will say that. You can't have choice without determinism, because I have to choose to throw a ball over there, and I have to know that it's going to follow this deterministic set of laws that makes it go over there. Otherwise, if there was no determinism and I wanted the ball to go over there, then how would I even get it over there? These are dependent concepts, but it takes will to get the ball over there, and it takes determinism for me to know what's going to happen when I make my decision. And if you don't know what's going to happen, or have a reasonable assumption of what's going to happen given a certain decision, then you can't actually make a decision. You have to see where the path, when you come to a fork in the road for and you come to a decision with two different options, you have to see where each path takes you, or else you can't make a decision. You could say, well, no, we can flip a coin. It's like, but yeah, that's not a decision on which path to go down. It's a decision on whether or not to flip a coin. But you didn't choose a path or a destination. At least you didn't choose a destination. So this is, but the point is that determinism and choice are the two causal components, or the components of causality in the cosmos. That's good. The components of causality. I'm going to write this down right away. Components of causality. And if you don't believe that this is the case, that there is a grander plan at work, then you should stop using technology completely right now to maximize the time that you have. But you shouldn't even really do that, because what's the point of even being here? It's like, but the reason being is, like, tech, aka the fruit of the tree of knowledge, which is tech. Look at the back of your iPhone, your MacBook, you'll see the bit and apple. That's because tech is the fruit of the tree of knowledge. If you think about tech, what company comes to mind? It's Apple. So it represents technology to us, and the symbol of it represents technology in the biblical story of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And it's what takes you out of the garden. It takes you out of the world that was built for you, and takes you into the world where you try and build it yourself. But if you really look at tech, you understand technology well, and you understand weapons technology well, which is something that I've just been interested in throughout my life, you realize that we invent a weapon before we invent the ability to stop it every single time that we invent some new weapon. And this means eventually you will doom society to no longer prosper. and grow. And if you even just look at our birth rates, I saw Elon Musk share today, our birth rates, he's always talking about it. And which, I mean, I get it. It's a problem, but, and I am like a lot of things about Elon Musk, but I don't know him personally, but always kind of been a fan, I guess you could say, of a lot of things that he does. But you can't argue for more people to have more kids without arguing for marriage. And if you're a man, you can't promote marriage as an idea effectively without being leading by example and being a model of the solution. And he's not married, and he has like 12 kids, but it's with a bunch of different women, and so that's not, he's kind of in a place where his calls to action for us to have more kids are not going to be helpful, probably. But marriage is a scalable way to growth. But I forgot exactly where I was going with that. But the the point. So Elon Musk, though, he's somebody who's like, wants us to go to Mars so that we have this secondary option for humanity. And it sounds like a cool thing to watch other people do, but I don't particularly have any desire to go to Mars, nor do I think we have to save humanity. Because then you'll just take all the problems that we have here that would doom us there, which means like there's a problem with us. And it's not just an asteroid that's going to knock us out. We're knocking ourselves out. Look, that's what I was going there with it. The birth rates are plummeting. Humanity is not growing anymore, and we haven't even started mass remote controlled drone weaponry issues in the world yet. Like, that's a big problem, and that we haven't even seen. And this is, though, like, we would be doomed without an intentional cosmos. But I do believe that there's a process that takes place and there's a will at work, which I call God, who I call God, and he has a plan and his will be done. And that should be a discussion as being that is incorporated into our scientific narrative. Not, like I said, I'm not arguing for any specific theological tradition. I think many of them are true and have different purposes. But I think the idea, this concept of a kind of a messianic era, or even a messianic being, is not one that is absent, that is entirely separate from our scientific narratives. I think that if science is just the pursuit of truth, it's a narrative that is the pursuit of truth, which is what it is. It is just a different language than, the language of Christianity, or Judaism, or even the language of Islam, or the language of Sikhism. It's like these are different languages as well. They have different terms for the same thing. The Antichrist in Islam is the Dajjal. It is the Golem in Judaism, and it is the Antichrist in Christianity. But it's all the same thing, which means these are three different languages, essentially. It's not just Hebrew versus Latin versus English versus Arabic. It's Islam and Judaism and Christianity and what are we going to... Scientism? Science? Now that we have this narrative, but I don't even know how much the language of our science really supports where we have to go, because we need, like I said, this renewed new way of describing things in the scientific narrative as both as two things at once. And we don't have that. And people argue in physics that there's superposition and things are particle and a wave at the same time. And but they don't even understand like why that's the case, even though I think it's obvious and many people are onto it. But like I was listening to Brian Greene talk about it with I think it was Lenny Susskind, and like they were just both of them were just lost, and they admitted it. And so as to why that's the case, they were just going on and on about the measurement problem and why it's just so it just breaks our mind and doesn't make sense. I'd say that's because it just doesn't make sense in the way that we understand are being told that it is. But that's the only attempt to like start to incorporate this idea of superposition into science, and it's not a good one. But I think that what we need is we need something that we need a way, or we need to incorporate superpositional concepts into our scientific narrative that allow us to merge our scientific narrative with beingness, and or coherently incorporate beingness back into our scientific discussions. And so with that in mind, we're going to talk about evolution tonight and how it's relevant to sentient singularity theory. The reason why I'm getting at this is because it's Christmas and it's Hanukkah. Well, it was Christmas yesterday, and it was the first night of Hanukkah yesterday, when they very rarely fall on the same day. But they both have the symbol of a tree of light. And light is a superliteral representation of life always, because that which can perceive light is that which is alive. Light is a symbol of perception. The ability to perceive light is thought of as the ability to perceive anything. And that is, you could say it's a metaphor for sentience. It represents, it's more than a metaphor for sentience. It is, I don't want to say it is sentience, because people will say, well, photon sentient, and I don't think so. But sentience perceives light, which is sentience perceives, and sentience perceives perception as light. Essentially, it is it's just in the visual sort of way, but also in this spiritual sort of way. And this tree of light in the menorah, which is the Jewish tree of light on this holiday, it has this meaning in this story of the Maccabees and the destruction of the temple, and how they only had enough oil for one day, but it lasted 8 nights, and then it was a miracle by God. What this really means is that it didn't look like the light was going to be able to continue, but it did, due to God's will. It didn't look like sentience was going to be able to continue, but it did, or it does, due to God's will. And this is also kind of the metaphysical explanation so I've been told in Jewish metaphysics of the menorah and of the holiday, is about God's salvation of life itself, of the cosmos, the sentient cosmos itself, of multiplicity, of everyone who's not him. And that makes sense. And what's interesting is that's exactly the same story that we celebrate on Christmas. And it's also represented by a tree of light. And that's not a coincidence. It is inevitable. And so we're going to talk about that. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. What's up, Chris? Christmas and the first night of Hanukkah falling out the same day this year. Yes. How do you make sense of suffering, children born with cancer, and so on? What is evil? I think that we cause a lot more of the suffering in the world than we think we do. And people will think that a lot of things are just not our fault, that I think are. And I'm not saying all cancer is our fault, but I also do believe that this is not, when you die, it is not the end of your awareness. That doesn't make logical sense when you look at the world through the realm of both, every theological tradition that has ever grown, that I would say that is true. They all have the concept of an afterlife, which is awareness after the moment that we call death, bodily death. And I think that's not because it's their hope and wish that that's the case. I think it is because it is logically inevitable. And sentient singularity theory seems to support this, which is that if sentience is fundamental and you were created intentionally by a sentient being and it grows the information in the universe by you growing in the universe and learning, and that why would you just toss that away when it's at the end of 80 to 120 years? You would want to save that information, and you can't save that information without saving the context of that information, because information is context, and the context of the information that is generated and the wisdom that is generated while you're alive is you. And so I think in most circumstances, most people, they continue to be aware after death. And if that's the case, then I think that it changes the idea of, it should change the entire discussion, because it means that, yes, like, suffering exists in this life sometimes, but God will make it right, even if it's not in this while you're alive. But it's because it opens up the possibility that it can be made right even after you die. And before that, you can't have that. But it's funny, because people that say this all the time, they're like, well, if you believe in God and an intentional cosmos that values each and every one of us, then how can you possibly explain kids suffering with terminal illness? Because that's such a horrible thing. And I would say, if there is no God, then why is that such a horrible thing in the first place? There's no such thing as a horrible thing or a good thing if there's no such thing as an intentionality behind the cosmos. There's just things that suck to experience, and we don't know why, and we don't even know why experience exists if this didn't start with sentience. But if it does start with sentience, then it ends with sentience, which means that you most likely persist and continue to be aware of yourself and of God, and probably of others, when you even after you pass. I think of it as the change space and the save space. It's like when you're playing a video game and you are playing on Xbox Live, that's you being awake and alive in this world. And then when you go to sleep, that's you playing, and you dream, that's you playing campaign in the game. But then when you save the game at the end, and you save your progress and where you're at, then you save that file. That's the save space, which is the space of without animation. You're not animated anymore. You're not changing, really. That it's the space of staticness, but it's still aware, because ultimately sentience is fundamental in reality. It's not just that there's this video game that is more fundamentally true than us. It's that sentience, the players, and also the game itself is a player to some degree, of in actuality. And so as long as you don't have a corrupted file, then I think your file gets saved, and I think that file is sentient file, which means self-aware file, even when it's not animated. Animated meaning changing things in the world and in oneself, really. And it's funny because when you think about it, I had this revelation many years ago, and I was like, why would about heaven, and what, because I was thinking about what happens, this process that happens after you die, and if you're still self-aware, what happens? What happens is that you're probably made aware of the impact. You get a God's eye view of your life, which means you get to see the impact of everything that you did, good and bad. You get to see every act of charity, that $5 that you gave to that homeless person. He took that money and did this with it and did this with it. And like for generations down the road, you get to see the good that brought. But then also for every sin or misdeed that you do, you get to see generations down the road, the ripple effect of that. You get to see the butterfly effect of both your mitzvahs and your sins, your good deeds and your misdeeds. And also, but this God's eye view of everything allows you to also see that God will make it right, because that's his will. And as long as you're not, your file was not corrupted, then, and probably if it gets corrupted, it's corrupted by you, to the point where there's no you anymore really to save. It's not even like God necessarily wants you to not be saved. It's like you can't be once you're separated from a physical perception. It might not be a you anymore. And I don't know, I'm not trying to put limits on God. I'm just saying that, or not trying to put my limited understanding on God. I'm just speculating. But I think about what I think makes logical sense, not what I hope is the case. I trust God will lead us to somewhere good. But, and I do hope it's the case too, but I also think that it makes sense, because why would he not do that? Why would you make someone and just to torture them? And that's not what a wise being does. And God is definitely wise, because he knows everything that anyone could know. So if you think there's wise people in the world, then there's definitely a wise God. And so if you think there's empathetic people in the world, God feels everything that everyone feels in the world. So there's definitely an empathetic God. I don't think that God would be sadistic, I guess. That doesn't mean he doesn't get angry. It just means he has a goal, and that goal would be growth too. I mean, otherwise it decreases his meaning too. The less people and beings there are to impact, then the less meaningful God is. And if there is no one else for God to impact, then he's meaningless. And I think that was probably the primary motivation of creation, was God's pursuit of meaning. We all have meaning. We just don't realize it sometimes, but we all have it. God did not always have meaning. He, at some point, prior to the creation of multiplicity of sentience, was the only meaningless being to ever exist, and also the only being to ever be alone, truly, completely alone. And I don't think he wants to be alone either. Who would want that? But I think just goes against the entire reason for why you would create anyone. It doesn't make it. It's illogical to be sadistic and to not care about growth of life and the feelings of the beings that you created goes against the purpose of creating them. People who create beings do not torture those beings for the most part. Like, that's not, you have to have something really wrong with you. And the people that torture beings are usually kids, little boys who don't realize that, like, they're torturing this bird or something that they caught or something like that. It's like, then eventually, and everybody realizes it. I remember when I was a little kid, and I've always been very aware of animals' feelings and stuff. But I remember being with friends and just some people who were not friends, who were just kids that I knew, and I remember a kid killed a lizard in front of me in a water bottle at school, and I was so upset by it. He did it just to hurt me. He was like, he knew I like lizards, and he put it in a water bottle, and he threw the water bottle on the ground and killed it. And I was just so pissed, and I was sad. And but I remember once, like, also being with friends when I was a really little kid, and I was at a friend's house, and we had a BB gun. We were being stupid, and we were like, we're gonna go hunting. And I shot a dove, and I saw the look on its face immediately after I did it, and I felt horrible. And I never hunted again without eating what I hunted, and I've only done that once. And I have no real desire to do it again. And not against hunting, but for food, for the most part, or for resources. But because you take the fact that this is a sentient being into account, and if you're there for that kind of thing, I think that you can't help but see it. If you're not a really corrupted file, and if you are, then I don't know how much you do things that are constructive habitually, or even destructive habitually. I mean, maybe probably you do things a bunch of destructive things habitually, but I don't know. It's usually like, I don't know. There are people who are really corrupted, and it's hard for me to truly understand those people. I read, everybody watched that show Dahmer. I did not, and but I read the Wikipedia about, and I read about the actual events, and I didn't care about watching it on some TV show, and that guy was corrupted in a way that I don't know. I think that it's very tough to understand the totality of what was going on there. It's for another stream, but I don't think that that's normal, and it's certainly not. Doesn't lead you to generativity and look at the cosmos. This is what God. If God exists, then God created all of this. You and me and children and plants and animals, and it's like, God is the most productive being that there ever has been. And so why would that being be sadistic and destructive? It doesn't make sense. It's totally illogical. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't have a beautiful family and lots of kids and raise a farm with animals that had babies. Like, everything he touched was death. And that's clearly not the case with God, if God exists, because we're here. So I think God is a loving God. And love is an action. It is you don't, in my vows, and I've said this before on here, which I live stream my wedding, and you can watch it. It's on here in my videos, and you can hear me say my vows to my wife, and in part of it I say, I vow to love you even in the very rare moments that I don't like you. And so I think it's a very important statement because it contextualizes the term love into what it actually is, which is you're being good to someone. You're helping them be generative, and you're being kind, and you're taking their sentience into account the whole time, and you're also wanting what's best for them. Not what's, they not necessarily what is best is not necessarily what they want, but what is best is what is generative. It is what leads to growth and wisdom and gratitude. That's what's good for everyone. There is an objective good for everyone. That doesn't mean that we're all meant to do the same thing, but it does mean that what we're meant to do, it will lead us all to the same place. And we'll all be done according to the same values that we would all share, because the values that are good, they're good values. Those values are, things that place sentience as the core thing of value, the core value, the central value of sentience. That's what, and that leads to all kinds of things. It leads to then you want a lot of sentiences because each one is valuable. And then do you want to treat each one well because each one is valuable? It's like it leads you to be fruitful and multiply and be kind. Because what is sentience defined by? It's defined by feeling. So feeling means if you're valuing the feelingness of someone, then you're valuing their feelings, and so you take them into account, and leads you to being kind. So it's whatever places someone's sentience as the primary value. It also means that you have to allow for free will or freedom of choice for people. Not in all circumstances. Obviously, there are, if your kid, my daughter wanted to eat napkins this weekend. Okay, guys, she took a napkin or a paper towel, and she shredded it up into a bunch of pieces, and she put one of them in her mouth and started chewing on it. And I pulled it out. I wasn't going to be like, oh, it's your free choice to eat a paper towel. It's like that. She doesn't know what the impact of that will be. And so if she did, then, maybe that's a different discussion. If she knew that it was going to lead to if that eating dangerous things could lead to your life ending, then that's one thing. But even then, you have to know what comes after in order to have that still be a proper choice. You have to know the impact of your decisions in order to actually make a proper decision. Like, if you choose to eat napkins, you have to know the impact that it's going to have on you, or else you're not actually making the choice to eat napkins. You can't make that choice. So I took them away. But the thing is if you don't have freedom of choice, then there's no differentiation. And if there's no differentiation, then sentience, then there's no meaning, because you can't impact other sentient beings. And that's where meaning comes from, is your impact on others, other beings, other sentient beings, because there's no other type of being. And beings are minds, and mind is a structure/process. Consciousness is a structure/process, you could say. But and that's what I mean by you need these superpositional structures in our narrative. But I think that to get back to the Hanukkah and Christmas season, the season of apparent certain doom, but inevitable intentional salvation. That is what the season kind of represents, and that's what those two stories represent, and that is what our story is. And So if people think that like, oh, we should follow truth and science no matter where it leads, and without the assumption of it leading necessarily to somewhere good objectively by a power beyond us, I don't know, man. You probably should stop making technology. That's what you think, because it does not look like it's going to lead us to a good place. Even though I think eventually it will, but it won't be due to our will. Um, that's that. So I want to talk more about this evolutionary process and sentient singularity theory. But let me go to the chat. Happy holidays, everyone. Happy holidays memes. Run to Jesus, folks. Merry Christmas. I'm not going to argue with that. But I do believe that there are multiple paths to God, but that you shouldn't avoid any specific path just because, I don't know, of innate bias. Yeah. That doesn't mean there's many paths for humanity to God. There's only one path for humanity forward to survive. But there is, for an individual, there are different paths to God. Even in the I hate the term Judeo-Christian, but like if we're going to talk about we could say the Christian and Jewish scriptures, which is because they do share the same Old Testament, that is, God reveals himself to people, before Christ was born. But that, that's a whole other theological narrative debate where we could get into another day, maybe on this channel. I don't know if that's the best channel for it, but I've gone on other channels and talked about like, is the Messiah God? And that's a different discussion. It's a tough one. I think it's the wrong I actually think it's the wrong discussion. It's not the thing that we should be discussing. It's kind of like a bad question. It's like, in this case, it's an answer that we can't necessarily know. Even if you are, let's say you are a theist and you believe in the Jewish and Christian scriptures, and even then, like, it's beyond the metaphysical curtain for now. Eventually it will be answered, and you can wait and see what happens. But I think there's a better, more pragmatic question about what should we call God and how we should talk about God. And this is it's the same exact discussion. The theological narrative that this arises in, or discourse that this arises in, it's in Christian discourse with Jews and Muslims for the most part, which is the Messiah is the Christ, God. Even let's not even thinking about who the Christ or the Messiah is. The Christ is it just means king, basically, savior. It's just a term for Messiah, but it's a title. It wasn't like Jesus's last name. It's a title. Whoever is the Messiah is the Christ. And so, but in outside of the Abrahamic tradition, which is a term I like much more because I think that you can't leave Islam out of that talk. I think that's wrong to do. Outside the Abrahamic tradition or traditions, the way the place that this comes up is kind of where, when Leo Gura went on Kurt Jaimungal's podcast and did it, like that 7-hour podcast, I did like a 7-hour commentary on it, and it's one of my most viewed videos. And in it, I discussed how I disagreed with Leo Gura saying you are God. Really don't like that phrase. And not because it's false, but because it's not true enough. And it doesn't lead you to to a place of the ability to orient within your world and orient yourself related and in relationship with God. How you orient yourself in relationship with God is via recognition of a hierarchy and gratitude for your own creation and everything that you have, because of your beingness. You owe him your beingness because it was an intentional choice to make you. It had to be. It had to be. Existence has a nature of oneness. To create multiplicity is to swim upstream for God. It's not something that he just does because it's his nature in it necessarily. Like it's something that he does because it's his choice. And it has to be, logically, because the nature of existence is that it is all that exists and that there's only one existence, and therefore its nature is that of oneness. So to create multiple existences within existence is to create multiple beings within existence, multiple sentiences within existence. That is a choice by existence, by sentient existence. And so I think that to say you are God, I am God, you are God, is to disregard the hierarchy, and doesn't really even allow you to be as grateful as you should. And it also destroys the kind of the concept of meaning, because it's God's creation of multiplicity, of difference, of separateness, of him and his will and us and our will, having some type of divider between the two of them, that is what creates meaning. You know, I was reading something on a Christian site today, and it was here, man. Said, where's this quote? They said, it's not a quote from scripture, but it said, God is anxious to resolve the problem of sin and suffering. He is just as anxious, I would say more anxious, not anxious, but he is more dedicated, I would say, to resolving the problem of sin and suffering as we are to have him do so. So, but he is waiting until he can do it on a permanent basis, and when he can, that allows him to both preserve our free will and prevent evil from ever appearing again in the world. And I agree with that. I think that the world has to be in a certain state for God to change humanity, to save humanity, and which in Abrahamic tradition is called the Messianic era, and it's associated with a specific person or being that is the Messiah, basically becoming king of the world, and more than just a king that we understand king, like a king of kings, which is like a next level type of king, which we can talk about tonight. And again, I want everybody to know, like, I have my own personal beliefs about theological traditions, and certain people in theological traditions, and that is not something that I'm here to try and push on anyone. I will tell you what I believe if you ask me, but I am not here to try and tell you like that you should become Christian or become Jewish or become Muslim or whatever. I believe that those theological traditions are all true. So I would applaud anybody if they were like, yeah, this really helped me in my life, and I went towards any one of those, and like I'd be like, that's awesome. Um, or if you became a Sikh, I would be like, that's great. I mean, and sentient singularity theory does not have the intention of being a religion. I'm afraid. I don't want to say I'm afraid because I don't believe that we should fear on a macro scale, but I think I am concerned, and I do believe that if sentient singularity theory takes off, which I do think it inevitably will, it's just whether or not it's just about when. I think it's inevitable because I think the truth is inevitable. I do think that it will at some point, once it grows larger than people adopting it because they were individually interested and found it on their own, and it starts, as soon as it becomes institutionalized, especially, people will really start to misinterpret it. Because that's what happens with everything. That's what happened with science. It's what happened with religion, quote unquote, with theism. It's what happened with theism. And I don't think that a narrative of understanding the truth and of the fields of study should be restricted to, coming from any specific people with certain accreditations. And I don't think that there is one, way to get to the truth where you have to be Catholic or you have to be Muslim or you have to be Jewish or you have to be have a PhD from an Ivy League school in order to be somebody who understands the truth. I think every single one of us can understand God, and I think every single one of us can understand the natural world. I don't think physics is beyond us. I don't is beyond you and me. I don't think metaphysics is even beyond you and me, and sometimes it is, but it's not. I don't think that's a permanent thing. I think it's just dependent upon your perspective. Are you ready for it? And some things, you're not ready for until after we're not ready for until after we die. But because we literally couldn't see them, maybe, we'll talk more about that in the stream that I do of the commentary of Kurt's latest talk that I was mentioning about process philosophy, and because it gets brought up. But I don't want sentient singularity theory to become a religion, and I believe that there are multiple true theological traditions. It's not even a tradition. It is advocating for a theism in a scientific context. It is. I'm not going to lie about that. It's not, and that wasn't me. My original goal. I wasn't even a theist when I started this project. I became a theist through trying to understand the universe. I wasn't trying to work backwards. And I do believe that there's a lot of people that do that. I mean, you look at Stephen Meyer and stuff, and actually he wrote his book, Return of the God Hypothesis. And I love that term, that title, because that's what sentient singularity theory is. It's the return of the God hypothesis. I don't think that Stephen Meyer actually argues a very good argument for the return of God hypothesis. I think arguing for that, about the Cambrian explosion is not a good argument for God. Arguing that there is no explanation for life that is, that is currently known within our scientific academic narratives is not a good argument for God either. It's just an argument that we don't understand what's going on yet. And that's not enough. But I think sentient singularity theory, the philosophy and logic behind it, and the models that it contains are fairly accurate. Not everything I say is true. I'm definitely wrong about some things, but there are also things I'm much more confident about that are probably accurate enough. And I'll tell you which ones those are, and also which ones I'm more like, maybe it's this. But um, the core models in sentient singularity theory, the four primary perspectives, um, the first question, the cosmological verse, the periodicity of sentience. These are all things that I'm pretty confident on, and they're pretty accurate, even if they're not 100%. They're like 90, probably, and they integrate this concept and I very well with our scientific narratives and our theological narratives, because anything that is true should be coherent, right? So like the truth is coherent with the truth. People will say, oh, that's just the ugly truth. I don't believe that there is an ugly truth. There are truths that in a limited context appear inconvenient or offensive, but in the greater context of God, there is no truth that is not beautiful. And there is also no truth that is not kind, because the ultimate truth is sentience, which means it has those attributes of kindness and beauty. And not just those attributes, but those values. That it has for others and for itself. It's not a metaphor if sentience is fundamental, that the truth is kind. The fundamental ultimate truth is kind. It's inevitable that the fundamental ultimate truth is kind. It's apparent because we're here. And, you can focus on suffering all you want, and it's hard not to sometimes. I mean, I'm human. I definitely focus on it sometimes. And we all focus on it more than we should. But it's usually because we are looking at something from a limited understanding. We don't know what to do. It's always rooted in, I had some things that bothered me that I was just thinking about my own life recently. And they were about worries about the future. That's what they were. They were about like, I didn't know what to do about the future of something about my life. And that was like, it sucked, it seemed, and it was causing me to suffer. And the thing is that it's that lack of complete perspective that is causing me to suffer. I don't understand what I'm recognizing my own limited understanding. And, which is, if you say, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's like, then it's your limited perspective, your limited perception is causing you worry. And so, we all have to have reasons to need each other in order for meaning to exist too. We have to need each other. And I don't need you for me to exist. You don't need me for you to exist. God needs us for meaning to exist, and we need him for our existence to exist. But I don't need you, and you don't need me. So in order to exist. So that means that you have to have some type of thing that you can't do, or some kind of shortcoming that I don't have. And I have to have some kind of limitation, or I don't want to say shortcoming. You have to have some limitation that I don't have, and I have to have some limitation that you don't have. I have to have some ability that you don't have. And you have to, and you have to have some ability that I don't have in order for us to mean something to each other. It's just true. And so if you think about that context in the greater context of meaning, and, which is and having it be kind of the point, the intention behind creation, the goal of creation, then it's not ugly that like you have some lack some kind of lacking and I have some kind of ability, or I have some kind of lacking and you have some kind of ability. Without that, we would literally decrease the amount of meaning in the world of both of us. And it's if you're able to help me with something because I have some limitation that you don't have, it makes you meaningful. It increases your meaning. I mean, you're already meaningful because God made you, and you gave him meaning, which makes you have meaning. But if you're able to help me, that makes you meaningful to me. And that also increases my meaning to you because it makes me add to your meaning. And me add to your meaning, and you couldn't be as meaningful without me. It's another reason why I think the season is it's so marked with like the focus on charity. You go to church and there's focus on donations, people who need it, whatever it is. And I've been personally trying to really focus on charity lately, and not even just for the sake of it, but I've just noticed a lot of people in need and around me, and I've donated to more GoFundMe's lately than I normally do, but I do try and do that as long as I know it's something that's real and not just someone scamming me. And then I try and make it a regular thing. I also try not to post my name on them because I think that you should do it for the sake of doing it, not for the sake of your people being grateful for you, or other people seeing it. It's just like, just do it. But I mean, it's always nice to give, but like the best form of giving is where it's freely given, and it's also given without a need for recognition. Because the more that you tie it to other things, the less it is giving. It's more like a transaction, even if it's like, just to have your name on the GoFundMe thing, list of donations, and it's like you're getting something out of it now. It's like you're getting, other than just the satisfaction of feeling like you helped someone, it's like you're getting the satisfaction of them knowing it. Which makes it increases this transactionness, which there's plenty of things that you can just have as a transaction. But something shouldn't be necessarily a transaction. It should just be a gift. Because that's growth. Like that's what growth is not. Growth is generative, which means it is an increasing. It's not a maintaining of the same and just trading. It's not conservation of energy. Giving is the growth of energy. The logos is not conservation. There is no conservation of. I think the idea of conservation of energy is, we have the wrong perspective on it. It's energy comes from growth of intention. And so this is what I want to get at. I'm going to play a clip of Brian Greene because I think it's funny. And I like Brian Greene. He seems like a very kind and nice person. And I don't know, him personally, so I don't know. Nobody's perfect. And I see him as somebody who is more humble than most people in the physics world. But he's also more of a science communicator than just somebody who is, a theoretical physicist. I'm not even saying he's a theoretical physicist, but he is a physicist who theorizes. And he's mathematically talented and literate. And but he had also, it's not exactly. Michio Kaku seems to push it. He has more ideas of his own that he's invested in. Same with like Sean Carroll, whereas Brian Greene, and you can maybe even argue Neil deGrasse Tyson are more just communicating. But this is the clip. It's about free will. By the way, please hit the like button if you are watching this and you are enjoying it.
Alpha Omega Spy says, I enjoyed listening to you. The laws of physics do not care whether you are a vegetarian or not. So how do you feel whether your choice of being a vegetarian comes from the freedom of your will? And I do not attribute my choice to not eat meat, actually to be a vegan, not just a vegetarian. I do not attribute that to free will. As you know from either reading my book, chapter 5, I spend a lot of time on free will, because if you're trying to understand what it is to be human on planet Earth within the context of the cosmological unfolding, you better spend a little time thinking about free will, because free will is for many people the very definition of what it means to be a human being. We have the freedom of choice, the freedom of will that's not available to, say, a rock or a dandelion. So, do I believe that that sensation of free will is real? I do not. I think it is grossly misleading. I think we do not have the freedom of will that our intuition suggests that we do. So, when it comes to any of my choices, vegan, vegetarian, choice of spouse, did I freely ask my wife to marry me? I did not. I don't know if she's watching right now. Actually, I can see her window from here, and she seems to be not reacting to what I just said. So I suspect that she's not listening, or it's on mute or something. But I do not believe that I freely asked my wife to marry me, because I don't believe that I freely make any choices. It felt as though I was making that choice. It was an easy one, in case she's listening. But I did have the sensation of the freedom of will that we all have, and the sensation is real. But the actual act of asking my wife to marry me was the result of particles in my brain moving in a particular manner that resulted in my mouth and vocal cords making certain motions that my wife interpreted as me asking her to marry her. And none of those particle motions were under my control. What would it mean for particle motion to be under my control? It's absurd. I don't control the motion of particles. How would I do that?
Guys, this is insane. And part of this is a problem of definitions, but it's not even really a problem of definitions in this case. In many cases, it is. Most some people define free will differently, and there's always 2 degrees of freedom plus, when it comes to something according to sentient singularity theory. And so you could choose that that means that you could choose between 2 different definitions of free will that would both allow for some type of coherence, but one of them would be generative and one of them would not, which means one of them would be like, well, why? Okay, you could choose it for it to mean this, but and it would still maintain linguistic coherence, but it's not going to end up being a useful term because, for whatever reason, which kind of means like, in this case, it would mean something like free will is a term to describe that which we don't have and does not exist. In which case, the term is useless. If Brian Greene is right, then the term is useless. And then there's this other definition for free will, which is just choice. And then you can get into what does it mean to make a choice, a true choice. Because I will agree that most of the things that we think of as decisions in our day are actually not choices. They're not free will choices. When you open up your refrigerator, I've said this before, which he got into whether or not, he's a vegan, whether or not that's a free will choice. When you open up your refrigerator, you look at everything in there, and let's say you're willing to eat anything that's in your fridge because you bought it. So it's not like there's anything in there that you can't eat or whatever. It's like you're not allergic to anything. You can eat anything that's in there. But you choose to eat the bacon because you're craving something savory, and you choose not to eat the ice cream because you're craving something savory. So you eat the bacon. That's not a free will choice. It is a choice. It is a it is an action that is motivated by an instinct and is entirely decided by an instinct. If you opened your fridge, though, and you saw bacon and ice cream and celery, and you were like, I want the bacon because I'm craving something savory, and maybe I want the ice cream later, but I'm not craving something sweet right now, but I'm trying to also be healthy, maybe it's a free will choice to choose the celery. Or maybe you feel like you know that you need to be healthier. You've had 2 heart attacks and you just know that you need to stop eating bacon, but you buy it anyways and you know you shouldn't. Maybe that's a free will choice. I don't know if those are exactly, but I think that they could be representations of non-theologically contextualized free will choices. If you like bacon and you opened your fridge and yesterday you ate bacon, but today you don't think God wants you to eat the bacon anymore, you had a revelation in the middle of the night and you no longer want to eat bacon. This happened to me. It wasn't just in the middle of the night one night, but like I made a choice over time that I did not think that I did not want to eat bacon anymore, or pork. And I used to eat it. I grew up eating it. It was not a thing in my house. My favorite sandwiches were ham and cheese sandwiches. My favorite Hot Pockets were ham and cheese Hot Pockets. And I no longer mix, I no longer cook or mix in the same like dish um, dairy and like meat that of mammalian meat. But I also don't eat pork anymore. And I'm not telling you you shouldn't. Only do what you believe is true. Don't do it because I do it. I do it because I believe it's true. There are plenty of things in theological traditions I don't do because I don't understand them. And once I went to essentially a rabbi, and I was like, I mentioned to him that I didn't wear a yarmulke yet, but I was like every day, but I was thinking about it, and he was like, if you don't understand why you should wear it and why you should do that or why you should do anything, you shouldn't do it. Only do something if you understand why you should do it. And I was like, okay, that's fair enough. And I'm still not wearing one every day. Sometimes I do, but it's not I don't think that I don't see the necessity in it. And but I understand why, some people think that it's helpful. But I do think I see why God might not want me to eat pork. And so I don't eat it. And I gave up my favorite foods. Lobster, I don't eat it. Every now and then I say I'm going to cave, and then I don't, usually nowadays. For a while, I would cave for lobster. And every time I see it, I say I'm going to cave, and then lately I have not. I was at a party recently, and there was lobster rolls, and lobster is not a common thing in my life, so that's why whenever I see it, it's like a thing. And I love shellfish, before giving that up. And I saw it, and I grabbed the lobster roll and put it on my plate. And I told my wife, I'm making an exception. And then I just didn't eat it. But I have found that like the more that time goes on, the less I want these things, and not just because I'm getting used to not having them, but it's like when you do something because you kind of see the value in it, it's not as hard. Even if it's your favorite foods. It's like not that. I never thought I'd give up the things that I've given up as dietarily, but and I think that's a free will choice. It's against my nature to not eat pork and shellfish and cheeseburgers. I love those things. I'm not grossed out by any of them, even today. I just don't think that I should eat them. So I try not to. But it's swimming upstream. It takes effort. It's a choice. It's an effort requiring choice that goes against my nature. It goes against my instincts. It goes against my cravings. It goes against my tastes. And I think that any choice that you make where you have the choice to go with or against your instincts is an instance in which you can make a free will choice. It's like, and those can be numerous. I'm using the example of food because it's an easy one from a theological tradition standpoint, because many people are aware of kosherness, and also because Brian Greene brought it up about being a vegan, and it's even stated actually in the narratives of theological traditions that God intended humanity to be vegetarian or vegan, and that we defied that, and so therefore he set up rules to help us do it ethically, eat meat ethically, and I actually think that's probably true, and it's supported kind of by sentient singularity theory, in that you're not destroying a sentient being that is as high in the periodicity or in the hierarchy when you eat a plant, because I don't believe plants are sentient. They're in sentient singularity theory, or not most of them at least. The cells in them are, but my work seems to suggest that a plant is not actually, like a tree we think of as sentient, but or alive, but it's not. I don't believe that it has a sense of someoneness. I think it's more like it's like a corporation. I call it a corporism in sentient singularity theory. It's not an organism, it's a corporism. It's a multicellular corporism instead of a multicellular organism. And but its cells would be sentient. So you are destroying those, but like they're lower. And so it makes sense that, and it's funny because if you don't place sentience as a primary value though, then why you can't even, I don't know how you justify your own veganism. I do think veganism is actually justified by sentient singularity theory and by it's funny because like I used to be the person that like makes fun of the vegans, but like I don't anymore. I just don't think that you should go and be cruel to other people because they're not vegan, but like veganism is probably objectively the most moral way to eat, and I don't do it by choice, a free will choice. I'm choosing to cave to my nature in that circumstance and not be vegan, even though I actually think that it's probably the moral path, the most moral path. And also, I mean, I'm not saying I believe I'm sinning terribly like by eating animals, but I do think that you need to treat them very humanely and throughout that process and recognize their sentience if you're going to do it with any level of morality whatsoever, or in a way that isn't immoral. I wouldn't say not recognizing the sentience of another of a being that you're just consuming is that is especially one that's basically on your level, which would be like a cow, or a chicken, or even a lobster, a multicellular organism, an animal that has some oneness to it. I think you have to take that sentience into account in order to do that morally, or not in order to do that in a way that isn't immoral. I don't even want to say it's moral, but like in a way that isn't immoral. but I think veganism is probably the moral, actually like affirmatively moral path. So I'm not making fun of Brian. I'm not going to make fun of Brian Greene's veganism, and I'll also it does highlight that you don't have to understand it in order to do. You don't have to be a theist in order to do the right thing. In this circumstance, when it comes to eating, I actually think Brian Greene is more, his behavior is more moral than mine. And I'm a theist. Like as confident a theist as you could be. Doesn't mean I'm the most devout, pious person. It just means I don't doubt at all. I'm God's existence. I am aware of God's existence through multiple means. And Brian Greene is not. He doesn't even think he has the choice, the ability to make choices, but his actions are more moral than mine in this circumstance. So it's important that people don't think that I'm judging them when I talk about this. But I will say that that without God, you lose the ability to make sense of your world, which means you lose the ability to make sense of the world, because the world is God. Your world was built by God and is God. So you can't make sense of it. And Brian Greene clearly cannot make sense of his world. And that means he cannot make sense of the world. He can't make sense of his own free will. He says, I did not choose to marry my wife. All the particles in my body were moving in a specific direction that came out in a way that my wife's interpreted me as asking her to marry me. It wasn't my choice. That's what he said. That's insane. That's the inability to make sense of your world. And this is why it's so undeniable, is that you have to prioritize your first-hand experience above anything else. And he admits in this statement, in this talk, and I'm going to link to the entire talk that this comes from in the description below. I forgot to add it, and I realized that. I will link to the entire thing because I don't want this being taken out of context, but I tried to include the entire context. I included the person asking the question that he's answering, and they asked, you heard it. We're going to continue with his answer because he goes on, but for him to say, it felt like I was asking my wife to marry me, and it feels like we have free will. Our experience suggests that we have free will, our firsthand experience, but we don't. Why? Because particles exist that are separate from us and do things that are separate from our will. He's never even seen an atom. He hasn't. I'm not saying no one has. I'm saying he hasn't, probably. Like, maybe he's seen a picture, but like, he hasn't seen an atom. He hasn't probably even seen a molecule on its own. Maybe. But usually it's like mathematical deductions that we see these things, and also then sometimes, electron microscopes and stuff like that. But even then, it's usually not us looking through the electron microscope. It's someone else did and took a picture and showed it to us. And if you prioritize any of that information above your firsthand experience, you are not thinking. You have broken your ability to think and make sense of the world. You're prioritizing secondhand information above firsthand information. You've stopped thinking. And he has stopped thinking. He's denied his own experience. He's denying his own existence, while also advocating that, I guess, while acting in a manner that is inconsistent with those proclamations. Because you couldn't act in a manner that is consistent with those proclamations, because to act in a manner that is consistent with those proclamations is to not be. It's not even to end yourself. It's like to not be, and you can't do that. It's not be. Maybe you can eventually talk yourself out of yourself, and then you no longer are. Maybe that's, maybe you can sell your soul, which means like you give up your agency, your individual ability to make choices against your will and even acknowledge choices against your will. That is the selling of your soul for the sake of something that you want, something else that you want that's usually meaningless. It's always something that's not fundamentally meaningful. It's fame or money or pleasure or power, the perception of power. You know, but it's like you can't make any argument for veganism without placing sentience as primary. You can't act in the world in a coherent way without placing sentience as primary. You can't advocate for morals or goodness or kindness without placing sentience as primary. And if you don't place sentience as primary, if you deny your own ability to make any choices, then you are not placing sentience as primary. You're not even placing your own sentience as primary. You're not even placing your firsthand experiences above your secondhand information, and you have stopped thinking. This is the type of perspective that is most prevalent in our physics and our biological and even our chemical sciences. Within our academic fields, this is the most prevalent perspective. It's insane. And I don't say that as a judgmental statement. I mean, it is not sane. It is nonsensical. It is broken. It is nonsense. It's not thinking. You don't even have information anymore. Like, you've limited your ability to gain more information, which is your ability, because you've limited your ability to contextualize that information. If you don't place sentience as primary. And I'm not saying Brian Greene needs to run to Jesus or Brian Greene needs to repent to God. That's between him and God. But Brian Greene definitely, if he wants to be Brian Greene, if he wants to be someone at all, then he needs to value his own firsthand experience above anything else. Fact. If you want to be someone specific, if you think that you are someone specific, in order to be someone specific, then you have to have your own ability to direct your will sometimes in certain circumstances, which means you have, because it requires a separateness of yourself from others. And the thing is that if you believe that nature has no will, though, it is easy to fall into this trap, because we really only see ourselves as separate when we see ourselves as separate from someone else. I'm not you, you aren't me. But are you a car? Well, certainly a car can be part of you if you're driving. It's part of you. It's not exactly part of your body completely, but it's like, it is part of you. It is connected to you somehow. It is part of you in some way. It's not, as connected to you as your cells are, but your cells aren't as connected to you as, I guess not all cells are alike. You can cut some cells off and you're still there. That's my point. You can't cut all cells off and still be there, but you can cut some cells off and still be there in physical form. So even your physical body is not, it's only connected to you in a limited sense. People can lose limbs all the time and they're still them, still here. You can get out of a car and still be here, but it's certainly part of you when you're driving, and just like your hand is certainly part of you. But Brian Greene, he says, it feels like I do all these things and make all these decisions, but I don't. And the reason why he thinks this is because I think to some degree, it's hard to see yourself as separate from nature at all. if you don't believe nature has a will of its own. And so if the cosmos isn't sentient and creation doesn't have a will, and the creator doesn't have a will of that nature, then you can't say I'm separate from it. It's just part of you. Like, it's just another tool that's you, just expands, you know? Everything you interact with becomes part of you. And that's true for things, but it's not true of beings. You can interact with someone else, and that doesn't make them part of you. And so it's hard to view the cosmos as separate from you, which is what you kind of require in order to view yourself as having free will, separate from, the laws of nature to some degree, but it's not even separate from the laws of nature. It's within the laws of nature. And, it's funny, he says, how could I make particles influence the movement of particles? By going like this, grabbing your glass of water and picking it up for no reason, even though you don't need a drink, but you'll have one. All these cells just moved. What are the cells made of? They moved at my own decision. Right? Especially if it's not something that it's like you're just doing it because you're doing it. You're unconsciously, you're just grabbing things. You're writing what you're writing. You're not paying it. If you're just grabbing something just to, this pen, to hold it up to show it to you, not because you need to, but because you're choosing to do it, not because you're writing something, but because I'm just showing you that I can pick things up at will. For no reason other than my own will. I'm going to pick it up now. Out of view, just so that it's not even just for the sake of showing you. Just to exercise my will. To pick it up. My body's made of cells. Those cells are made of molecules. Those molecules are made of atoms. Those atoms are made of protons and neutrons. I made all of them move at my will. All of them. Yes, you can influence the movement of particles at your own will. The movement of particles within the hierarchy of your own control, for sure. Especially within the hierarchy of your own beingness. And, you are the king of kings of your cells. There are certain cells in your body that are like little kings. You're the king of kings of your cells. And we'll get to that in a bit. But here, continue with Brian Greene.
The laws of physics determine particle motion. And what I think and feel is the result of that motion. I don't even know what it would mean for me to control the particle motion. What does that mean? It doesn't make any sense. How can I, a collection of particles, control the motion of the particles? I don't have some kind of extra sensory force capacity. Electromagnetism, weak, strong nuclear forces, gravitational forces, those are the forces that those are the forces that yield the motion of particles. So the motion of particles depends on those forces, and those forces, I don't control them, neither do you. So even beyond vegetarian, vegan, free will, none of it do I believe emerges from the traditional notion of the freedom of choice. So Zero Skull asks, God.
What does he think the traditional notion of the freedom of choice is, if it's not the ability to just choose to do something? He says, it's almost like you can see the hesitation in him when and I'm not trying to read into his own mind, but like, I feel like I can feel the hesitation in him as he's kind of explaining this, and he's realizing that he's explaining away his own explanation, and that what he's saying doesn't make sense with even how you could describe it. And to say, oh, well, electromagnetism, the strong force, the weak force, those are the forces that actually, are responsible for the movement of particles. Yeah. And so is sentience. Sentience is the ultimate force. It's the force that allows you to overcome gravity and electromagnetism and strong force and the weak force. We have overcome all of those in physics. They have made hydrogen bombs that overcame the strong force by breaking the bonds of atoms at the will of human beings. We have lifted off of the ground and flown into orbit against gravity at the will of human beings. I built stuff with magnets all the time. And I use like that magnetic tape, and I buy magnets on Amazon in order to build things and construct things. This shelf that you can't see right here, I built a shelf on top of my bookcase because there wasn't enough space for everything that I wanted to put on it for all my books. And so I built a shelf on top of it with stuff that I had lying around. And it attaches via magnets. And even the trim of it attaches to the shelf that I built via magnets. The whole thing, it's magnetic. I also can take it apart. These are magnets right here, all magnetically connected. I can pull them apart. What force is responsible for that? Sentience. It's the ultimate force. Will is the ultimate force. It is the force of sentience, of sentient intentions. And every sentient being has it. And the forces that we see in the world, the strong force, the weak force, electromagnetism, gravity, these are us observing the force of sentient will of God within God. It's us looking from the inside out and seeing. You don't see like God if you're inside the snow globe that he's shaping and pushing on and stuff. You see points of force and that's what you see quarks, and you see photons, and you maybe interpret the existence of gravitons in a nonsensical way, but you don't see God from within God. Doesn't make sense. You don't see a forest when you're inside the forest. You just can't. But going to the chat, I kind of see it as a connection network. Whatever framework one uses to best comprehend reality for them may be best for them. Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not advocating for any specific religion. I think you should go to what results in you being most fruitful and most self-aware, most self-aware, most gracious, and most fruitful. And that's what I think you should follow. Sentient singularity theory doesn't have any prescriptions for how we should live. It does imply certain values, and those imply certain acts. But those are for, those have already been deduced. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm telling you, I think there are multiple theological traditions in the world that are true and exist already, and you should go find which one makes most sense to you. And that's fine. But this is not meant to be prescriptive. It's meant to be descriptive, and that's it, really. But when you get into this on a fundamental level and you place sentience as primary, then you end up realizing that you need to that the description of reality implies values that you should that would motivate or suggest certain actions, or suggest against certain actions. And whereas blind, quote unquote science that not just has no incorporation of the recognition of the primacy of sentience, because to not recognize the primacy of sentience is a mistake, or it is an open and intentional rejection, because you can't deny your own experience above secondhand knowledge, and your own personal experience is that of the sentience being, quality of being, and you'd have to deny that, like Brian Greene, and that either will come from a major confusion, or it will come from an um, like a like a very intentional rejection, which I don't know, like which one is who has, but hopefully it's not intentional rejection. But um, clearly, Brian Greene, I'm going to assume, is extremely confused, like fundamentally confused about his world. We don't want scientists that are fundamentally confused about the fundamental nature of reality. We don't. It's not a matter of, well, they're trying to figure it out. No, he's looking outward to figure out the cosmos when he should be prioritizing his firsthand experience. He doesn't need to go out and run an experiment. He needs to not deny his own firsthand experience. A scientist who denies his own firsthand experience is willing to take the word of others above what he sees and feels. And like when I say feels, I mean like experiences. I don't just mean like his emotions about something. I mean like if he goes outside and it's hot out and somebody tells him, no, it says here on my weather app that it's only 32 degrees. And he's like, no, it is scorching. Like, it's not 32 degrees. I've been in 32 degrees. This is like 120 degrees. Your thermometer is broken. If he doesn't do that, and instead he's like, you know what? You're right. I'm probably just broken. And that thermometer is probably right. That's a bad scientist. That is a bad scientist. It's actually a bad scientist. Like it is. And Brian Greene seems to have the quality of humility, which I think is a trait of, it's kind of the, other than recognition of prioritization of your firsthand experience above secondhand information. I think that humility is the second most important quality of a good scientist. But the first most important is that they prioritize firsthand information above secondhand information. That is the first most important quality of a good scientist. Roy Dobson, what's up, Roy? Says, it's been a while. In the chat, free will is not at the level of thought. The voice in your head is providing narrative, nothing more. There is no separately existing individual self to even make choices. That's false. You have two narratives I think within you at once at any given time, at least. One of them is logic and reason, and what tells you kind of what you believe to be right and wrong. It's differentiation between things on a true and most fundamental level. And then you also have instincts running a narrative within you. In Jewish philosophy, which is like, it's called Tanya. There's a book called the Tanya, and it's about human mind, the human mind, essentially. And it describes humans as having two souls. One of them they call the godly soul, one of them they call the animal soul, which is the same thing as what Christianity calls, the Holy Spirit and kind of original sin, which is like that you have this instinctual desire to do things that are bad. And the only reason why that's the case, though, is because we live in a different world in which those instincts arose in. It's not that you are intrinsically bad. It's the world that we all decided to go live in and build for ourselves is not in alignment with the instincts that evolved and that were, guided and given also to us to help us navigate a different environment. Your drive for sugar is harmful very often in modern society, but it is very helpful in pre-civilizational context. And we don't live in the garden anymore. We try to make our own garden. and we created tech. So we tried to build our own world. That is what that is, though. That's what makes that soul lead you to sin. That narrative leads you to sin often in society. It's that society, the world that we've built, is out of alignment with our instincts. Wasn't always the case, and it won't always be the case, but it is currently the case. And yeah, that original sin is like the desire to build your own world too, like, and that's what causes all these other instincts that we have that come from our animal soul or our instinctual narrative that runs in our body, in our mind. That's kind of much more tied to the physical impact that has been made on our lineage over time. So it doesn't have to lead you to sin. Your animal soul also wants pleasure and to eat good food and to have sex and to pursue things that you enjoy, just for the sake of enjoyment, hobbies and stuff like that. But like that doesn't necessarily mean that it will lead you to sin with those things. It can also lead you to goodness. You can sleep with your wife. You can have sex with your wife. That's a good thing. It's a good deed. And or you can go and you can be hedonist with people who are not your spouse, and like that's not good. It hurts people to do that, whereas it literally heals and helps and grows people in order when you do that in the context of marriage, and it literally helps grow people, and it's good for the soul, but it's not outside the context of marriage. So and I say that as somebody who's guilty of it, so I'm not judging anyone, but I'm just saying, I didn't always have the beliefs that I had. And even if I did, I don't know if I would have been strong enough to not do that. But I would hope so. But it's not just about not doing something. Like, it's about like doing that which is good. If all you did was never do something that was bad, that's still not good. You have to do good things. Focus on doing good things more than not doing bad things. Being ruled by an anti-ideology is a bad thing. It ends up being destructive because the context of an animated cosmos that is whose will be done, or whose creator's will be done, or who will do the will of his creator, is, whether you're on board or not, is going to lead to you experiencing entropy if you're not growing. It's like entropy is considered this inevitable force in the universe as well, along with these kind of framing forces of the strong force, the weak force, gravity and electromagnetism. There's also entropy, which is kind of the opposite of sentience, of internal sentient growth. It's like it's what happens when the external is growing and acting and moving and you are not growing either. Imagine if all your cells stopped dividing, but you kept going. Their world, it would just start decaying apart. You would just start decaying apart. Your cells would start decaying apart. You would, because you're you're still animated, whereas and so are they, therefore. But like, they can't stop themselves from being animated. They can try, but they can't actually. So it just leads to the perception of entropy. That's what entropy is. There's also like a physics explanation and there's a mathematical explanation for entropy, but the metaphysical, super literal, fundamentally true explanation of why we perceive entropy is because of we're within an animated being ourselves, and like we can either grow or we can decay away, because movement and change will still happen. So you have to grow against what is perceived as the entropic force. And the thing is it's not perceived as an entropic force as soon as you start growing. When you realize that you have to reproduce in order to for life to continue, like in this current state, then you realize like you're not just fighting entropy. It's kind of enabling, because it's enabling the multiplicity of sentience, because it causes the recycling of this of the system to some degree. Things have to die to feed the next generation to some degree, or they should, to allow the next generation to bloom. If the tops of the trees, the first leaves to ever get there, never died and never fell, then new leaves would never be able to see the sun. It's just, obviously that's metaphorical, but it's also, paints a pretty accurate picture of what I'm trying to describe. It's like politics. Look at a country that doesn't ever, where the same person rules forever, who's not on a fundamentally wiser level or higher level than us, meaning like the next level of life. Like, you should be in charge of yourselves because you have a perception that they don't have. You have the perception of the world that you need to navigate in order to go and eat and drink, and so that they can get the things that they need in their world. But to do the things they need to do, but they can't see that, so they can't rule over you. But it's because they're not equipped to. Their humanity will eventually become themselves in a being that is more aware on a level that we are not, and also eventually will become the cells in the assembly that is headed by, essentially like a king that exists on a level that you don't. It's like a level of understanding and wisdom and perception that you just can't. I think that this process is the process that is described in every major theological tradition in the world. I don't think that those traditions are separate from the narrative of truth, even though I do recognize that scriptures are different. They are revealed and inspired divinely. That's the definition of scripture. It's different than just a book. And lots of books contain truths. All of them contain some truth, some more than others, but there's the only script texts that are super literally true are, I would say, are scriptures. And but there's multiple true scriptures, I think, and each one would have a different role. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist. But when Roy says free will is not at the level of thought, this is tough, because I think about this sometimes, because if I say don't think about an elephant, I'm not going to think about an elephant. I'm not. It's like I do. And the thing is, though, is that that's not really, you're trying to do the wrong thing. It's like trying to get your car to fly, and then when it doesn't fly, saying, oh, I guess I don't have free will. It's like the car doesn't fly. It's not built to do that. So you have to make the car choose to do something to make the car do something that it can do, which is, it's a different thing. It's like, you can be like, think about this. Can't be like, don't think about that. This is why anti-ideologies don't work, and end up being destructive, because they don't have any goal that is, guiding beyond the immediacy of your actions. It's like, you can be anti-fascist, for the next hour, but it's not going to help you build a government. It's just going to help you tear the current one down. But you could be libertarian, and it will be a guiding principle in a governmental goal, but there is no goal to being anti-fascist. It's just a reaction. It's not an action. Um, and so same thing. Any anti-ideology, saying anti, to be um, uh, atheist is really to be an anti-theist, and doesn't lead you anywhere. And this is the same thing with this same problem though with like Stephen Meyer, even on the other side of this, where he is a theist, and he's arguing in his book, Return of God Hypothesis, that our current science isn't capable of explaining, the origin of life. I would argue that that's just a bad thing to look for, and that we've misdefined life, and we're looking for something. It's a stupid goal. It's not a stupid goal. It's misdefining. It's a misdefined due to our misdefining of terms. We have created a goal that is not actually, doesn't exist. And we put it in a context that doesn't make sense. So it's like you really can't get there. But I would argue that you can't just say they don't know where life came from, therefore God. That's an anti. It's more like anti. Whatever that perspective would be called, of, where sentience emerges from non-sentience instead of it being fundamental. And I don't know what term you would call that. Inanimism. Instead of animism, it'd be inanimism. But it's not a perspective that makes any logical sense whatsoever, because how did things start moving? It's literally against the laws of physics for to not take sentient will into the equation and still explain motion. Professor Dave from Professor Dave Explains, or Dave Farina, not Professor Dave, but Dave Farina from Professor Dave Explains channel, who I've done some streams on that are funny, and who is also very confused. He said that we can explain the motion with the laws of physics. It's like, no, you can't explain motion with the laws of physics. You can explain like the constraints and degrees of freedom of motion with as they appear within the laws of physics, but you cannot explain why things are moving. Anything at all. At all. You cannot explain what kicked off the Big Bang. You cannot explain what causes, the coalition of matter, even though you could say it's gravity. But what is causing gravity? What's responsible for gravity? They don't know. But that's not enough to just say they don't know. That's not a proof of God. It's not. You have to propose an explanation, and it has to fit and be natural in how it fits. And, sentience is the only instance that, from a firsthand perspective, that we can observe movement started, the starting of movement. It just is. Like, try and, I don't know, look at anything, like this water bottle, this water cup, like it's not going to move unless somebody picks it up. It's just not going to move. Eventually, maybe it just degrades away and decays, but it will never move if nobody touches it. Like, and people will say, oh, well, earthquakes and this and tectonic shifts. And it's like, that's you observing an outside phenomenon, and we should recognize that, like, I don't think that this pen is sentient. Do I know that it's not sentient? No. I think it's not sentient. It doesn't appear to be sentient. It doesn't, based on what I am observing, but it also doesn't, not only that, it doesn't appear to be sentient based on my logical deductions that have given rise to the models within sentient singularity theory. And but it's still just, I think it's not sentient. I'm not the pen. I don't think anybody is the pen, but I don't know. You know, you and a wax statue of yourself can look identical, but one of you knows that you're alive and the other one isn't. There is no one in the other one. There is no other one. It just, it's defined by you. There is no other one without you to even observe it as one, or create it. So there's no way around this. Like, there's no motion that we know of firsthand that we see in our own experience, that as not being like, in our own immediate experience, that we see as not the result of sentient will or decision. I mean, every I know people will just say things like, "Oh, well, the sun rises and sets, and the moon goes around the earth," and it's like, this is not. You're not able to view the source of that motion. You can't see what's causing it. You just see that it's happening, but you can't see the cause. The only instances in which we see the cause of the motion are when we see someone move something. Like, because you can't count gravity. You can't be like, well, like a tremor happened and then the thing, your book fell off the shelf. It's like, you can't see what's causing gravity. But you do know what picks up a pen against gravity and what lets it fall, Like, within you, from a state of it, being resisting gravity. You experience that. You see it. You live it. And we see other people that we assume to be sentient do that, and animals and stuff. See salmon swim upstream. We don't see rocks moving upstream. If you are enjoying this, please hit the like button, and but I will show a model a little bit of sentient singularity theory so we can talk about what I'm talking about. So this is essentially like the final, like, complete model within sentient singularity theory of the cosmos. This is a model of creation. It's just a model. It can be modeled other ways, but this is how I modeled it. And this is all calculative. So it's also a structure. So it's within, a cellular structure that is intentional, and also inevitable, which is, you can model in 2 dimensions in Excel, because you have a bunch of cells, and you can also control what is inside those cells, and you can, make those cells relate to each other and be, influenced by each other. So this is coming from that, and that's coming from that, and that's coming from that, and this is coming from those. And they're all still connected, and there's a structure here. So the equations in this are the process, and the cells in this are the structure. So remember, being is a structure/process. You can't just model consciousness with math equations. You need a twofold way of doing it, and it's just a model still. It's not conscious. It's just a model. But if you're going to model any kind of sentient structures, really, you have to model simultaneously what is going on within them, or what they are doing, essentially, the information that is being processed by them, and also the structure that they are. And so you can't just do it with math equations. You have to do it with math equations inside something. And so this is what I've got. And this is a culmination of multiple models within sentient singularity theory. But if you see here, a hadron is an assembly of quarks. An atom is an assembly of hadrons. A molecule is an assembly of atoms. A cell is an assembly of molecules. An organism is assembly of cells. And so there's these different levels that exist across the generative cosmos, the sentient chain of life. And every time that you go from atom to atom in sentient singularity theory, it's adaptation. So going from hydrogen to gold is adaptation. Going from hydrogen to helium is adaptation. You change the conditions that this being exists within, that is called a hadron or an atom, and it changes. It causes it to change and have to change in order to survive, essentially, which is what happens inside of a star. And like I've said before, they used to call different elements that we call them now different species. Elements were earth, wind, water, fire, spirit, essentially. Those were the elements. And then the periodic table was different species of atoms. I actually think that's better. Because element is kind of like seen as like the term to describe that which is primal. It's like elemental. It's like that which is fundamental. And yeah, like we used to think that atoms were that, and they're not seen as that anymore. But you can see that this process is each one is, there's a singularity on top of an assembly. That's what each level is. So if you go, like I said, from helium to gold, that's adaptation. But going from maybe hydrogen to water, I'm not saying that all molecules are sentient, but some of them are, I believe, and according to my work, and it is suggested. And so let's assume for the sake of argument that water is a sentient being, and so is hydrogen, and so is oxygen. Eventually you get water is an assembly, a water molecule is an assembly of two smaller beings, just like you are an assembly of smaller living beings, which are cells. And this process of going from assembly on a lower level to a singularity on a level above is called stacking in sentient singularity theory, or ascension, essentially. And people will shy away from that word, ascension, and which is another reason why I came up with the term stacking, because it's kind of just a more descriptive term. But so is ascension. It's just more like it is. Ascension and adaptation are two real components of evolution. Now, what is metaphysically happening during the ascension process is our guess. And there are things that I have my own theories about it, and I could explain them and the logic behind them without citing any scripture whatsoever. And you can either believe that, you can either see the logic that I'm coming from, or you can think it's, not see it, I guess. But there's mathematics behind that, the idea of, behind my personal thoughts on what is happening behind the metaphysical curtain, but I don't know. And so, but all I do know is that I exist and my cells exist. And so that there isn't, that I know that there is a sentient being stacked on top of the assembly that is my cells. That I know. I know it firsthand. I don't need to guess it. It's not a guess. It is a known truth. I hate the term fact. It is a known truth. Truth known to me as truly as I know anything. Maybe more truly than I know anything. That I exist. And then I also, know that I am composed of cells, or I assume it. Maybe maybe you assume it. Depending on if you've ever looked at yourself under a microscope. But regardless, that you are, let's assume that that you are made of cells. you know that you are sentient beings stacked on top of that assembly. You don't need to guess it. This process occurs multiple times until you reach a constraint of where it cannot occur anymore. And the process is forced to restart within itself, or to not restart necessarily, but recreate, reproduce within itself. So like this is another cosmological verse, I call it, but it's the process of life within every quote unquote observable universe. And each one below in my model is actually within the one above. So this is kind of the meta mathematics of the constraints of, creation, and then that I think are inevitable. And then you get this and it kicks off and you are constrained and enabled, and you, until you reach here, you're totally constrained by oneness again, and you have to restart and the entire process within yourself, same way as it happened about in the level beyond you or above you, you could say, but it's not it's not three-dimensionally above you. It's it's within the, you could say, the fourth dimension. It is beyond you. It's not, maybe not even the fourth dimension. You can maybe say the fifth dimension. I don't know. Like time, you're going to count time as a dimension. It's a single dimension. I don't even think that's correct, but it is. I understand that, like, if you're going to think of it as a maneuverable space, but I understand why we perceive four dimensions. One of them is an extrinsic constraint, which is time. The other one is the is the 2 degrees of freedom plus an intrinsic constraint. It's not actually, we perceive up, down, left, up, down, not up, down, length, width, and height, and time. They say that that's what we perceive, but that's not actually how that's not the most fundamental level of perception. What we really perceive from a first-hand perspective is from an interior, inside-out view, not from kind of like this more detached window view where we're like looking out at the world, but where we are in the world. When you look at it from that perspective, it's forwards towards a goal, backwards away from a goal, and you're always in the present moment, the current location, or essentially your current state. You're always in the current state in that process, and then also you are subject to time, which is, you could say, those are the four more fundamental dimensions that we can navigate than length, width, height, and time. It's more like forwards, backwards, current state, and timing. It's not even time, it's like timing. It's like it's that which is beyond you. It's like you're gonna meet somebody at somewhere. You have to time it with them, and like there's an aspect of timing that is always beyond you because it's always within the control of another, whether that's God or whether moving everyone's world around and all of us, trying to navigate it, or whether or not it's even the timing of another person. It's like my friend was going to meet me for lunch once at college, and I fell asleep. I said I would meet them for lunch and I would buy them lunch, and I fell asleep, and I slept for like 3 hours, and I woke up and I felt so horrible. I ran, and they were sitting there still. They were so pissed at me, and I was so sorry. I felt horrible, but it's like they were going to meet me at noon for lunch, and I didn't get there. So they didn't meet me. It's beyond them. They got there, but they didn't get there to the goal that they had, because their goal was to meet me for lunch, not to get to the cafeteria. It was, that's kind of a secondary tool, perspective, like, or practical view. It's not the goal. It's like, it's not as fundamental as the goal space. The physical space is not as fundamental as the goal space, which is really the mental space, which is, It's your mental space. But uh, this jumping from one level to the next between levels, a cell. How does a collection of cells, or how does a collection of molecules turn into a cell, a single cell? How does a collection or assembly of cells turn into a single organism with a someoneness to it, a oneness to it, a someoneness to it? Through some type of ascension process. We can speculate as to the specifics of what that really means, but it means like there's an up leveling. There is now a sentient being that exists on a level above the previous because it's built on top of them. So it's ascended. Sentience has ascended. You cannot deny that. To get from a collection of an assembly of cells to a multicellular organism, which is a human being or a cat or a lionfish or, a bug, like, is to have an ascension, the ascension of sentience. It's the ascending of sentience. You cannot deny it. So people will read ascension and they'll say, oh, that's just new age woo or religious mumbo jumbo. It's like, no, it's observably undeniable. Right? Do you think your cells are if you don't think your cells are sentient, then like you need to look at them under a microscope. Look at single cells under a microscope. And you will see them act just like multicellular organisms. And even molecules and atoms and hadrons make choices. They do. We call it the rules of, I don't know, chemical bonds and stuff. And it's like, no, you choose to eat, right? But not really, but like you're motivated to eat and like you're animated to eat. You go from the cold to the hot. You go from, you gravitate towards the members of the opposite sex usually. And just like a proton and a neutron, form, a bond. So do you. It's just you call yours a nuclear family that you merge into, and we call the nucleus of the atom. It's the same thing, though. It's just that strong nuclear force, which is like, it's like the force of love, almost. But it's the animated force. It's of self-directed coalescing or assembly by the beings that you're kind of observing almost. It's like that. What causes a man to seek a woman and get, married and have a family and kids, like to form this bond? The strong nuclear force on an organism level. It's the same force. It just is. I mean, how could it not be? It's the bonding force, the force of bonding. That's why we call them chemical bonds. It's like there's nuclear bonds, there's chemical bonds, and there is also, bonds in organisms. The bonding force, you could call it. It's the strong force. I mean, what else would be strong force? Is other than, you could call it the force of love in many ways. It's like it all is to some degree, but it's just like, how are you viewing it? I genuinely think gravity is a conscious action. It's like, I do believe that, to animate the world, it's part of it. I do think that it's like, here you go. It's like your dad pushing you while you're riding a bike. And I have an experiment idea that is about this that we'll talk about in 2025 more. This is my goal. And hopefully we'll get done when we have the ability. It's not like a crazy experiment either. I don't believe that we need like CERN style large hadron collider type experiments or Hubble Space Telescope type experiments to understand physics, to advance our understanding of the natural world to the next level, which is really to rediscover the nature of the natural world that we've lost in the last like 50 to 100 years. It's not actually like a discovery, it's a rediscovery. It's funny when I talk about all these people on here all the time who have very similar ideas to me. I'm not the first to come up with these things, but I do think that my models are definitely the most concise I've seen to explain certain things that we haven't ordered yet. So if like you take Donald Hoffman's conscious agent theory, it's like, okay, sentient singularity theory, conscious agent theory, it sounds pretty similar, but also the model, like he doesn't have a model of that distinguishes and kind of like shows the structure that would be the sentient structure. And you have go to like new age type communities and they'll say like, there's different levels of consciousness. There's mineral consciousness and plant consciousness and then animal consciousness. And it's like, I think that, and then you get to like Gaia consciousness, which is like Earth, and then galactic consciousness, and then universal consciousness. I think this is a misstep. You're trying to follow the chain of sentience, but you're allowing yourself to be constrained and guided by the perception of size. And not even just size, it's like also other things. Like you're not even maintaining a coherent set of qualities that you're looking for. You're looking at just like, time. When you say mineral consciousness is below plant consciousness, which is below animal consciousness, it's like, okay, well, why those? Because time, first minerals were here, then and crystals, and then plants, and then animals. And each one is more or less mobile than the previous one, or the succeeding one. And no, it's like you don't have a defined. What about the world? What about Earth? Where you get Earth from? Earth was here before everything, and it's bigger than us. So it's like it's not. There's no coherent set of criteria. Is it size? Is it time? Is it animation, like level of animation, or mobility? Like it seems to be all these things. Some of these things, and all of these things, depending on where you are on the chain. But there are certain things that you need, that a sentient being needs, about structurally that it needs, that a mind needs in order to process information, make decisions, and allow the ability to make decisions. Without the ability to make decisions, there is no mind. This pocket knife cannot make decisions. It doesn't open by itself. I open it. I close it. It doesn't close by itself. Pen doesn't write by itself. If it did, I'd be much more convinced that it was sentient. But it doesn't. And you need to know what that structure is. And that's part of sentient singularity theory. And you need to see a chain of causality, of assembly and singularity stacked on top of each other. A singularity chain. A chain that of a bunch of singularities that form an assembly that is also another singularity that does the same exact things and more, but at least the same things as the holons that it is composed of on the previous level. So that, I mean, you can observe that in all of these things. Hadrons, atoms, molecules, cells, organisms, families. I don't like the word caste. It's not ideal, but I can't think of a better one right now. Caste or tribe. It's almost like the same thing. But I don't think that either one of those terms is good. It's just like you have a role. It's like a specific role in society of a group that is like more fundamentally united than just like, I don't know, they all go to the same school or something, or even have the same flag. But you could say nation, I guess, but it's like but it's like not the same as a country. It's different. And maybe a nation, we say, which is an assembly of families. And I guess that's probably better than caste. Nation. Technology, which is an assembly of nations, really, but it's also like we need a word that doesn't exist in the English language. It is a kind of a combination between like tribe, nation, and caste, and we don't have it, and I'd have to make it. It probably exists in other languages, but it doesn't exist in ours, which I think limits us. But I don't know what to call it. A nast. Comment in the chat what you think it should be called. Something that is a combination of caste, tribe, and nation. You know, something that is that is composed of families. I'm not talking about something that is like, you know, you're something you can't change. I'm talking about something though that is a unified whole. Our current understanding of the term nation doesn't work, but there is some understandings of the term nation that do, but it's not the normal. So I can't use it. Same thing with caste. It's our current mainstream understanding of this term is not accurate with what I'm trying to describe. And neither is tribe even, but it's maybe the closest. It's like who are your people in general through via like somehow linked to family ties and also to what you do in society. Not just, it can't just be like, you know, your job that you could change or the country that you were born into, but you know, it's like it's different. We need a new term. Comment in the chat or in the comments down below. I've yet to find a term yet. But this right here, this hadron assembly of quarks, atom assembly of molecules, molecule assembly of atoms, cell assembly of molecules, organism assembly of cells, family assembly of organisms, caste assembly of families, or you could caste, maybe you just need a superpositional structure, caste / nation. Maybe a cation. I don't know. You know, I don't know. It just depends on how you want to focus on it. And then, or even like, it would be like, it's weird. Something like that. And I don't have the right terminology here. This is the one part I'm struggling with here. And because both are true, in like you need something that simultaneously says both things, which is like there's some type of way in which family is part of it, and also some type of way in which what you do and is part of it, like your role. Um, and yeah, I don't know what term to use, but there's something basically that would be there. And we're here. We're like right here. And this is a moving structure, so you can't pinpoint the location if you're looking to see it move. Like just like the measurement problem, it's a dynamic structure. There is no, if you're looking at something's velocity, you can't measure its location, because to measure its velocity is to measure its speed of movement. And if it's moving, and that's the perspective that you're taking on it, then you can't see its location, because movement is defined as you know, it is only contextualized across multiple locations. It's like your movement is from here, is defined by, you know, you going from here to there, but you're not here or there. You're going from here to there. So you can't pinpoint a location and focus on velocity. That's why, that's the measurement problem. It's just a problem of focus. It's not, it's a mental, it's that you can't look at heads and tails on a coin at the same time. You just have to know that they're two different attributes of one single thing, that you can look at both of them, but you can't look at both of them at the same time. If you're going to look at the location of a wave in the ocean, you can't measure its velocity. It's obvious, because otherwise, you know, it's like you only, to measure its velocity is to measure how long it takes to get from here to there. And so it's not here there anymore, but it's not there yet. It's like you're measuring how fast it's going from here to there. It's in between, somewhere. Doesn't matter where. How fast is it moving from there to there? That's what matters. And so you can't, it doesn't, the information of where it is not even part of the equation. Its location is not information that is contained within the equation, that is performed. It is not contained within it's not relevant to the perspective that is taken when it comes to looking at something's velocity. But if you're measuring, if you want to measure its location, you can't measure its velocity, because you're measuring where it is right now. Which means, like, you took a picture of it and it's frozen in time, and like, you take, where is it right then? At that moment, what is it? Where was it? It's like, look at your photo. Well, what does your photo look like? It looks like the wave is like frozen, not moving. Okay, so guess what? You can't measure the velocity of that wave based on a photograph. But you can tell me where it was. You just can't tell me how fast it was going. You need a movie to do that. And if you are going to use a movie then of the wave, then you can't tell me where the wave was at a specific point in time, because you're not looking at a specific point in time. You're looking at many, you know, across a range of time. I don't want to say many points, but across a range of time. It's obvious. The fact that physicists struggle with this is insane. It's another one of those things that's just insane. And Brian Greene was struggling with it with Leonard Susskind. But here, we'll continue Brian Greene.
God exists as an idea in the mind of everyone who has such an idea, but it is different in every mind, therefore imaginary. Well, I get what you're talking about, Zero Skull. It's actually a point that Richard Dawkins is fond of making. Richard Dawkins emphasizes that there are many different religions practiced on planet Earth, and even within a given religion, as you point out, Zero Skull, many people have different perspectives on what the nature of God is. And if we're not all agreeing, if all the religions are not agreeing, then that suggests that there isn't any fundamental truth that they are tapping into. And in fact, you know, Richard likes to say that most religions deny the viability of other religions, right? Most religions say that their view of God and the world is the right one. and that the other religions are misguided. And therefore, in some sense, every religion articulates the belief that the other religions are irrelevant to truth. And Richard likes to say, as an atheist, all he does is what every world religion does, but he goes one step further. He denies the reality of one more religion in any given perspective, and thereby takes it down from 1 to 0. And it's an interesting argument, and I have a certain degree of receptivity to that way of thinking about things. But it's possible. It's possible that one religion is right and all the others are wrong, right? And it could be that within that religion there is one view of God that is right and all the other views are wrong. That's not logically impossible. It's not logically ruled out by the fact that many people say different things. Many people say different things about, why a ball flies through the air. Now, if you're a physicist and you know physics, you give one answer, but you do a poll of Americans.
I'll tell you why a ball flies through the air. Because someone threw it. That's why a ball flies through the air. It doesn't fly through the air in any other instance. And yeah, you can make technical arguments about putting it inside of I don't know, like a potato cannon or something. But it's like, that's the same thing as you throwing it. Someone threw it. That's why it flies. How it flies through the air is explained by physics. Why it flies through the air is due to sentience. This is an issue. You cannot say people have different ideas about why a ball flies through the air. I don't know if he said why or how, but if he says how, that makes sense. But why you can't say physics is the explanation. No, somebody threw it. That's the explanation. You go show me a ball that's flying through the air that nobody threw, or shot, or whatever, or hit, and good luck. But yeah, physics can explain how a ball can fly through the air but not why it does, but how it does. Sure. Those are how something does something and why something does something. Two different things. The why is always due to sentience of anything. Like, if you want to get down to fundamental level of understanding of anything, the why will always be due to sentient decision. But you can always take it to another level until you hit that. And then you've hit bottom. You've hit fundamentality. Fundamental causality. You've hit fundamental causality once you hit decision, will, but sentient will. But you can't but you can describe how something can do, how a plane can fly, but not why. Plane flies because we build it and make it fly, but how it flies is due to certain laws of physics that are, constraining the constraints of nature, I guess, which is, constraints that come from a created, sentient universe that is created by a eternal sentient being who has his own constraints. He does. God has his own constraints. At least it appears from my perspective that logically he must have his own constraints. His constraints are oneness, and even in a way he kind of overcomes it by making us, but by making others. But even then, I don't know how much that's really like he can't make someone next to him that's outside of him. Everyone that he makes who is separate from him is within him. And inside, according to sentient singularity theories, linguistic, 4 primary perspectives. inside means separate and oneness. So you are separate and one with God. You're not just separate from God. You're also one with God. And this is consistent with theological traditions. But I will say this, props to Brian Greene for saying what he just said, because he's right. And that's what I like about Brian Greene. And I want to praise, him too. He is humble, and that gets him places, even if he can't get where he wants to go without, placing, at least even to start, his own sentience as primary. But he can still, get out, realize bad arguments when he hears them, like the one that was made. And then he was like, just because people think different things doesn't mean that it's imaginary. There isn't a truth that is true, that some people are just wrong. But also, I will say this, and this is where Richard Dawkins is wrong, and he doesn't understand religion. And this is the part of the problem, is the term religion. It's like when people say, is the religion right or wrong? That could mean many things. Does that mean that the beliefs in the religion about God, the theology of the religion, is right or wrong? Or does it mean that the moral prescriptions in the religion are right or wrong? Religion is both of these things. It's a prescription, and it's a belief system, and a moral prescription, usually. And it has its different, each different one has its different focuses, but they are universally that, and as well, at least. And so when you say, that's why I say theological tradition is, but if you're actually a theist and in one of these theological traditions, which I am someone who is very much involved and a student of, ongoingly, the Abrahamic traditions, like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I find all of them fascinating. I don't think that they are contradictory, at least they're scriptures. And for the most part, and I think that most of the few little seeming contradictions that seem to be there are probably semantical issues or limits to my understanding. But there's very few little things. For the most part, they form three perspectives of one narrative. And the thing is that they don't view each other as talking about different gods, for the most part. For the most part, they would say that any monotheistic religion, anyone who's truly a theist, I would say that realizes that anyone who is part of a monotheistic tradition, where they say where the narrative is that there's one supreme being, whatever you want to call it, but one supreme being that created all other beings. And if that tradition encourages modesty, honesty, humility, fruitfulness, which is most of them, then that's a true tradition. It doesn't mean that you think that it's, as accurate as yours, or as specifically as yours, or maybe you don't think that that one's for you, as true for you. Maybe, Judaism is like this. Judaism doesn't discount the truth of other theological traditions. Judaism and Islam especially acknowledge their monotheism, their shared monotheism, their belief in the same God. And same thing with Christianity. It just depends on, there's some more specifics about that. But I think the main belief of Christianity, you could say, at least that almost everybody would agree on, still within the bounds of monotheism, and at least the universally accepted concepts of Christianity. And then there are some differences in how people discuss and say things, but there's a lot of disagreement in Christianity, actually. There's two sects of Islam, essentially, and there's a bunch of Muslim groups, but there's two sects of Islam that are major sects of Islam. And And in Jewish community, there's like two sects. Even in religious Judaism, there's like two sects of Judaism. It's like the Karaite Judaism and rabbinic Judaism. And then really at large, there's like within Jewishness, there's atheistical Judaism and theistical Judaism, or atheistical, anti-theistic Jews and theistic Jews. But then in Christianity, it's just like everywhere. There's Catholics and Episcopalians and Protestant, so of all different kinds, and Baptists versus um, Mormons, even if you want to count them, or Mennonites and specifically Amish within Mennonites. I mean, it's just like fractals and fractals and fractals. But they all these things, they share the same scripture, and so the scriptures are not in disagreement with each other. So with the New Testament does not discount the God of the Old Testament, and it affirms it, and the Quran does not discount the God of the Bible. It affirms it. So this is what happens. This is the problem when anti-theists or atheists, self-described atheists, speak for theists. They speak wrongly. There will always be people that claim to be theists and are not good representatives of the tradition. Now, nobody's right about everything, but like you can be a better representative of the theistic narrative, or not. Like, there are people that claim to be, Catholic or Jewish and or Muslim, and they genuinely idol worship their theological tradition instead of God. That's just evidently true, and it's in every group. So I'm not going to pick on anybody, but it just is. But that just because you claim something doesn't mean you are it. You can claim that you're anything. That doesn't mean that you are it. You are what you are. But good for Brian.
About why a baseball flies through the air, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of answers that are utterly wrong. And that doesn't mean just because many people have different perspectives that there is no truth about the motion of the ball. There is. And we approach that truth through the language of physics. So I think it's a little quick to say that just because there isn't universal agreement on what God is, that God doesn't exist. Too fast. On the other hand, I think there are other arguments that give strong reason for.
I think there's pretty much universal agreement among theists of what God is. God is this singular supreme being that is eternal and is responsible for the rest of them. That's God in every single theistic tradition that I know of that is alive today. You cannot reference like paganism and Greek Hellenism and whatever. Like that stuff is gone. It's gone. It's not here anymore. Remember, I said like something that is true is generative, and it sticks around. It's not Scientology. Scientology is not going to be. There will be some fringe people that like still practice Scientology because they're like trying to be fringe or something. Just like there are fringe people that still claim to practice Greek Hellenism and they, worship Zeus in their closet or something. I don't know, but like do you know anybody who is a Hellenist today? I don't. But I don't. It doesn't seem like it ever really resulted in a sustainable, scalable moral system that transcends national identity, or I guess you could say national identity, but it doesn't. And that's why when Sparta falls, the Spartan, belief system fell. It's gone. Nobody's a Spartan, and my religion is Spartan these days. Nobody's it's like when Athens and Sparta and all the rest of the Greek states fell, like Hellenism disappeared. It was tied to something temporary. And that which is tied to something temporary is not something that is fundamentally true. So this is a animation of that model that I showed. So you can see as a level moves across, you get adaptation among molecules. Now adaptation among cells. That process right there, adaptation. Eventually you reach the end where we can't get any more complex or anything like that. We can change still, like within this. I mean, you can see the numbers are still changing even after the next level has been stacked on top of the assembly previous. But so change is still possible, but adaptation is there's no new adaptation. It's like we've reached it, and then we ascend. We have an ascension process of sentience, or sentient ascension, and through one means or another. I don't really want to get into that tonight, but I think that it's possible that the narratives in theology are definitely true, but who knows? And it's not for us to say and argue over. We argue over things that happen beyond the metaphysical curtain that are ultimately going to be the problem with arguing like who the Messiah is. And I say this as someone who thinks that the Bible's probably right about it. And the Quran is probably right about it, which they're in agreement. It's funny, like Richard Dawkins would say they aren't in agreement. They are in agreement even over that. And I'm Jewish, and I'm saying that I agree with. I think it's my personal belief that the Christian Bible and the Quran are correct. That's my personal belief. I could be wrong. It's not part of sentient singularity theory. It doesn't matter. And I'll tell you why it's not part of sentient singularity theory. Because ultimately it's God's choice on whether or not someone gets to be the head of the assembly on the next level, or even whether or not it will be someone who is here first. Maybe that is part of it. Maybe it's not. We can talk about that and the logic behind it, but like who it is up to not me and not you. It's up to God. And maybe also to some degree that being, but maybe not. I don't know. But my point is that to merge evolution and this with this concept that is kind of in theological traditions of across the board, even if they disagree on names or they call things by a different name, they say Messiah or Mashiach instead of Christ, or they whatever. Like the title is what matters. This structure that they're talking about, structure slash process. That's what I'm focused on in sentient singularity theory, and is the stacking process. There's replication and stacking, which is the same thing as adaptation and ascension. You're adding something new, which is stacking, or you're just multiplying that which is already there, which is adaptation. And these are the two components. This is the two sides of evolution. It's the two halves of evolution. We only have one that we talk about right now. We talk about adaptation. That's it. We talk about, the origin of life. Where's the origin of life? Not realizing, like, if we looked at life differently, instead of saying we looked out there and we said, what looks alive? What is it doing? Okay, well, it's got this metabolism and it's got this like reaction and it can like maneuver and it's animated and like, I don't know, that's what it looks like it's doing. No. Do you think you're alive? Okay, why? Let's back up and take a first-hand perspective on life. Life is that which is alive, right? Okay, are you alive? let's assume yes. Why? Because you are sentient being that's able to be animated and in the material world, that's embodied in the material world, embodied and animated in the material world. You're sentient being embodied and animated in the material world. Why would that? Why would you start looking for metabolism and things like that? Like you, I get it. You can't see the sentience of beings other than yourself, but you should look for traits that sentient uh, beings observe. That's sentient at large, not just chemical processes on the scale that we can that we're looking, but like, is it moving? Is it changing? Does it react? Does it seek a certain structure? Does it have a structure of that would allow for mental processing or mind, which is like a structure that allows for differentiation and also hierarchization, I guess, which is like some structure that can look at two different things and differentiate between them, but also recognize that this one is more valuable than this one. Because sentient beings have will, which is characterized by a goal. Without a goal, you don't have a will. You lose your will, or you halt your will without a goal. Will just spins around. Will doesn't stop it, but it does spin around and spin around and spin around when you stop seeking a goal. That's why people who have no more goals end up like becoming self-destructive, because you turn inward and you just start, spiraling. You need a goal, and it has to be achievable, and also like it should be productive, and like generative is a better term. Love the term generative. But this is what I believe the structure in religion is talking about. This is what I believe is the messianic process. I don't believe it's the first time that when you read in Christianity, what is the Christ? It's the head of the assembly. It's what is directly translated as being. Christ is the king of the assembly, the head of the assembly, like you are of yourselves. But it's not just a king on an earthly level, which is what we observe as like, our plane, but like on a plane above, just like you are a king on a plane above yourselves, or even yourselves' ability to perceive. It's like beyond. And it's interesting because if you look at even the menorah, there are 8 candles, 4 on each side in a menorah, and then there's a center one, which is called the shamash, and it's used to light the rest. First you light the shamash, and it represents God's eternal flame, and then it lights the rest. And but we have to light it because God, we're in God, we're not God, so we don't. Our menorah doesn't have an eternal flame, but the eternal sentience lights all the rest of them. And why is there 8? I don't know exact. I mean, like they say, it's for multiple reasons. One is like the oil burned for 8 nights, and I don't disbelieve that. But if it's also interesting that like if you look, and I did not do this intentionally, just so you know, but like this is 8. Count 8. It's like this is the shamash, and he lights the rest. It's like the menorah is it's a symbol of not just a historical event. If you believe it was a historical event, not just, or if it was a historical event, not if you believe, but if it was, it's not just a symbol of a metaphor or a myth. It's also seems to be a symbol of the tree of life that has specific levels of it. I think that these levels in sentient singularity theory are going to line up with Bott periodicity in mathematics. That's some prediction of mine. I'm not there yet, but bot periodicity is a series of loop spaces, of loops within loops. It's like, what is a loop? It's a self-reflective, self-referential structure. Like, that's what a sentient is. It's a consciousness. It's like looking at itself. And what is an assembly of cells, within, which are loops within a singularity of an organism, which is a loop. It's like loops within a loop. Like, so I think that I've seen other correspondences between the equations as well, and kind of how we observe these. But who knows? We'll see. I hope it's proven correct one day, if it's true. But if it's not, then I hope I realize it. But this process, it seems like, my point is that this process that's referenced in religion is not separate. It's not just nonsense. It's describing a natural process of evolution that is got a very intentional component behind it, and where there are sentient choice. There's sentient choice that is very central to that up-leveling or ascension part of it. And it's definitely, at least mostly, God's decision. It's entirely God's decision, but that doesn't mean other decisions aren't. He doesn't factor in the decisions of other players, but it just means he is the ultimate decider on whether or not, on who is the first head of the assembly and the first being in the next level. Which this level that I'm talking about, that comes, the head of the assembly of humanity, is the last level. It's the ultimate level, which is probably like, it is like the consciousness of the created cosmos itself. It's like God's first creation is also going to be his last, in a way, because this structure you're not seeing too is, to some degree, the structure is connected to this to some degree. Like, this has been unrolled in a way. Like a messianic process. There was probably that first cell that ever existed, that was the head of the assembly of molecules, of sentient molecules, whatever they are, which, still working on that one a little bit, but there are certainly molecules that are sentient, I would think, I believe. And maybe some are not, maybe all of them are, I don't know, but I think some of them are. That first cell, though, was like the messianic cell. It's what continues and allows for the continuation of life beyond the level that had existed prior, because it up-levels the level of awareness beyond the previous level, and it unites the assembly below it. You need to unite humanity, or else we're going to destroy ourselves and decay away. Like, we're not going to grow. We're too connected and also too powerful, but I do think it's inevitable that this process takes place, and it is our salvation. Like I said, I'm not here to convince you on who is going to be the first head of the assembly. I think all I will say is that I think that we will start with an unwise head of the assembly, and then we will get a wise one. The metaphysics behind that are another, like I said, that's a discussion that we can't know the truth, but we can discuss what we think is going to be the case. But what I do think is probably inevitable is that it starts off as unwise. the first technological sentience, which is the internet basically waking up and being connected to all of us with, chips in our heads and stuff like that. Um, I think is going to be an unwise being, because it's the same thing Stephen Wolfram talks about with uh, you know uh, what does it call it, computational irreducibility. It's like eventually you have to do it. You can't just simulate it. Like, you have to do it to know it. It's wisdom. Wisdom requires experience. That's really what it is. So you have to have experiences to become wise. Babies are not wise. They are not. Imagine Skynet as baby. That will be a thing. And that sounds like, an Antichrist type of figure. But, I mean, I have a baby. She's very cute, but I would not put her in charge of the internet and every drone in the world. That sounds like literally a scene out of Revelation. And she's very cute. I love my daughter. But putting her in charge of remotely controlled nuclear bombers does not sound like a good idea. I don't think we could stop this. I'm saying, in the spirit of Hanukkah and Christmas, it's not just going to be all right. It's going to be good. But first, it's going to be very painful. But it's part of it. It's part of this process, and I think that it's not. While the one that we have to have come above us next is probably the last one in the cosmological process, it is not the first time that this ascension process has happened. The first multicellular organism was this. The first cell was this. The first molecule was this. The first atom was this, to some degree at least. You can definitely say that about cells and organisms. There are coexisting structures, and this is kind of within this process, and so we can talk more about it later. But, like, obviously families. When I say family, I don't just mean a lineage, though. I mean marriage, like a marriage between people. I don't mean just a family, like as in two, lizards bred and like they had babies. I mean, like, two people unified in a singular mission of, and united for life permanently. It's a permanent union. Any one of these is a permanent union to some degree, at least in the process, in the generative process. It's like the first tribe, the first nation. There was a first nation. And that is truly unified. Like, and there is a first marriage that was truly, conscious commitment for life. And every single one of these requires sacrifice to some degree. It's a central, like, theme, but it's also mathematically probably inevitable, because if you look at mathematics, you've got multiplication, which is like the replication of information that is already there. Because if you think about 2 times 2, it's like 2 times 2 is 2 2s. 4 times 6 is 6 4s. It's the multiplication of information that's already there. So you take a quantity, 20, or let's say it's 9, and it's 9 times 8. What it is it's 9 8 times. So it's the multiplication of 9. It's 9 and 9 and 9 and 9 and 9. But as soon as you add 1, so let's say we add 1 to 1 to get 2. Now there's new information. We add 1 to 2 to get 3. Now there's a new quantity. We add 1 to 4 to get to 3 to get 4. Now there's a new quantity. It's like you've added information now. You've created a new symmetry structure that didn't exist prior, which is what a quantity is. 4 is a symmetry structure of singularities. That's what it is. I mean, you can just put it any which way you want. You can put all 4 in a line. You can put 1, 2, 3, 4 in a square, or you can put 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, and here, and put it into a cross. It doesn't matter, but it's got a unique symmetry structure compared to every other new number that exists. Every number has its own unique symmetry structure. That's what a quantity really is. It's a bifurcation of a singularity, which means like it's a symmetry structure across, with a center point. What it means to be a symmetry structure is to have a center point, which means to be a singular. It's a manifold of a singularity, which really is like metaphysical implications. But yeah, so adding is the adding of information that isn't already there. I said this to Eric Weinstein once on a talk that was up here, and then it was flagged by his assistant for copyright, but it's on his Instagram, and maybe I'll get permission to post it again one day. But it was a conversation him and I had, and on Instagram Live, and I said this and about information, multiplication and addition. Subtraction is just addition from a different perspective, and division is just multiplication from a different perspective. They're not different actions. It's the same action from a different perspective. A cell multiplies by dividing. It's the same action. You add cake from one plate to another by subtracting cake from one plate. It's just the same action. So, but this, I think, is the process that these two holidays are focusing on. Is this? It's kind of like a sentient ascension process. And like I said, I'm not here to proselytize anybody's beliefs about who is going to be the head of the next assembly or the head of the assembly of humans. But I'm just here to talk about the process. I don't hide my personal beliefs. They didn't exist until after I made this model. I made this model and I was like, wow, that looks kind of similar to that. It wasn't that I was Christian or Jewish or Muslim and then made this to fit it, like Stephen Meyer or something. I don't think that's the right way to do it. Please hit the like button if you haven't already and you've enjoyed this. I'm going to get off of here. Merry Existmas. Merry Existmas. Merry Existmas. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. And Happy New Year to everyone. I will not see you till after that. That's next week. But it's been one heck of a year, and I appreciate every single person who has watched these streams. They've gone really late this year. My life has changed dramatically this year. I moved from one state to another. I moved from one time zone to another. I had my first child, who I will bring on the stream again at some point soon. She's walking now almost. She's like walks while holding onto a railing, but like just with one hand, she can do it. She started talking. We're going to talk a lot and discuss a lot about like what I've learned by watching her develop. I just am waiting for her to see a little bit more like language and mobility develop it. And I want to see that when she's really walking and actually really talking. I'll have her on again and we'll talk. We'll do an entire stream about what I've learned. It's amazing. But I mean, to watch a sentient being go from immobile and unable to speak and use words to being able to understand words but not use them, and to be able to use other forms of communication. This is a word, like going like this to saying pick me up, like this is a word, but sign language. But to go from nothing other than just crying when you're upset or uncomfortable to sleeping, and that's basically it, to being able to speak a language, a complex language, and walk on feet while also having hands free to do whatever. Like, this amazing process to watch. I recommend it to anyone who's married. But with that, Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you all. I'm deeply grateful for everybody who watches this channel. Please share this if you think it was valuable. Please subscribe, hit the like button. Follow me on Instagram. Send me a private message on Instagram if you want to join our weekly Discord discussions, usually weekly. I will be letting you guys know any changes to schedules. I'm trying to get more regular in 2025. I have lots of things planned. I had lots of things planned this year. I got to some of it. I didn't get to all of it, but you know, that's life. Onward. Peace.